Romantic Tales. Chapter 227. The two shadow guards exchanged a look and blocked the door. Wang Fei, please don't make things difficult for us. Yi Li said, if I beat you down you won't be disobeying orders, right? The two shadow guards looked warily at the woman in front of them. They had seen Wang Fei's skills before. In a situation where they couldn't hurt people, they didn't have the confidence to stop Wang Fei. Wang Fei, I'm afraid it won't work. The shadow guard at the door raised his hand and several figures jumped down from the walls, trees and rooftops. Yi Li raised an eyebrow and sneered, and San and Si take them down. Yes. Two low voices responded. Two figures flashed into the courtyard like lightning, one on the left and one on the right. In a moment the shadow guards were all subdued. Looking at the other's angry and unwilling eyes, and San patted the other's shoulder comfortingly and said, Brother, don't be sad. Shadow guards have different levels. Everyone's starting point was the same, so they understood the shadow guards very well. But the other shadow guards didn't understand them. The brothers didn't suffer in vain for the past few months. Didn't they see the results now? It wasn't that they were too weak, but that they were completely out of the realm of the shadow guards. If the situation didn't allow it, and San would have laughed to the sky. Yi Li turned back and smiled at the two shadow guards blocking the door. You want me to do it personally? The two shadow guards sighed and moved aside. Wang Fei, please. They were temporarily staying in a rich merchant's residence in Yonglin City. Before Yonglin was surrounded, the owner had fled to Jiangbei. Rich people were always more afraid of death than normal people. The study in the front yard was very large and even had a bedroom to rest in. So last night when Mo Xiuyao was resting in the study, Yi Li didn't pay too much attention. After all, he had just arrived in Yonglin and there were many things he needed to do. However, after seeing Feng Jiao, Yi Li suddenly remembered that she had not seen Mo Xiuyao since she returned to Yonglin last night. She had eaten breakfast and lunch alone. If Mo Xiuyao was really that busy, there was no reason for Feng Jiao to be idling on the city gate tower. Furthermore, when Mo Xiuyao had asked her to help out in the capital, he had not felt the slightest bit guilty. Stepping into the study, there was indeed no one there. Yi Li quickly walked to the bedroom behind the study. Before she entered the door, she heard the sound of something hitting the ground. She quickly rushed in. As soon as she entered, Yi Li's heart trembled at the sight before her. The man who was still valiant and invincible on the battlefield yesterday fell to the ground in a sorry state. The quilt on the bed was torn into pieces and thrown on the ground in the bed. The flower table placed not far from the bed had fallen to the ground, and there were also some porcelain scattered around. Mo Xiuyao's eyes were tightly shut. His clothes were completely soaked as if they had been soaked in water. His fingers were already stained with blood. Li, get out. Hearing the sound of footsteps, Mo Xiuyao did not raise his head and only said indifferently. Yi Li's footsteps paused, but she did not stop or turn around. Instead, she quickly walked to his side and helped him up. Are you better? Mo Xiuyao tiredly nodded and allowed Yi Li to help him back to the bed. He bitterly smiled. Li, it seems like I always let you see my most sorry state. Yi Li indifferently said, this time you asked for it. We are husband and wife, not strangers. We can't always see each other's most perfect side, right? Mo Xiuyao closed his eyes and said with a faint smile, it should be said that you have never seen me at my most perfect state. His most perfect state was long gone before he met her. Yi Li reached out and held his hand that was still spasming from the intense pain. She indifferently smiled and said, how could that be? Wasn't it very good yesterday? She lowered her head and looked at the dried blood on his fingertips and the mottled wounds on his palm. She softly asked, when did it start? Mo Xiuyao, who seemed to have gradually calmed down, was surprisingly easy to talk to. After a while he said, when the sun was about to rise. Yi Li's hand froze and she felt a sharp pain in her chest. It was already the end of the afternoon. It had been a full 7 or 8 hours. If you don't feel bad, then sleep for a while. Mo Xiuyao did not reply this time. His shallow and long breaths showed that he had already fallen asleep. But even in his sleep, his brows were still slightly furrowed and he would occasionally show a pained expression. Yi Li wanted to get up and cover him with the blanket, but she found that one of her hands was tightly held by Mo Xiuyao. Helpless, she could only sit back down and frown as she looked at his sweaty clothes. She hoped that he would not catch a cold because of this. But she couldn't bear to wake him up now. Looking at the heavy shadows in his eyes, she knew that he had not had a good rest in a long time. Emo Shuyao did not wake up from his deep sleep until the sun set in the west. Although he had only slept for less than 4 hours, he felt much better than before. Emo Shuyao could not help but let out a sigh of relief. This time it was finally over. "You're awake?" Yili's voice came from outside. Emo Shuyao looked up to see Yili walk in with a tray. She put the tray on the table and then looked up to say to him, "Since you're awake, go take a bath first and then eat dinner." Emo Shuyao was slightly startled. "Li, why are you?" The scenes before he fell asleep reappeared in his mind. While he was drowsy and in pain, Yili's clear voice clearly entered his mind. It miraculously calmed his mind that was about to collapse. Then he listened to that clear voice and slowly fell asleep. Yili saw that he was looking at her without saying anything. She walked over and asked worriedly, "What's wrong? Are you still not feeling well? I'll get someone to call a doctor." Emo Shuyao pulled her and said, "I'm fine. I just slept for too long and I'm still not fully awake. We can't call a doctor outside right now." Yili did not expose his stupid lie. Emo Shuyao was probably not unconscious even in his dreams. "Then go take a bath first. I'll get someone to prepare it." Emo Shuyao looked down and found that he really did need to take a bath. Emo Shuyao quickly finished washing up and walked out with water vapor all over his body. Yili hurriedly got up and went forward. Looking at the thin inner clothes he was wearing, she turned around and took a cloak to put on him. Emo Shuyao helplessly looked at her and said, "Li, I'm not so weak that I can't even stand up to the wind." Yili nodded and said seriously, "Yes, I can't even stand up to the wind. Compared to you, it's too easy. Sit down and eat." Yili put a bowl of fragrant and delicious porridge into his hands and watched him eat. Emo Shuyao could only lower his head to taste it. Not only was it fragrant, it was also very delicious. Emo Shuyao, who had not eaten anything since last night, felt his stomach warm up. His appetite, which had not wanted to eat because of his exhaustion and pain, suddenly became much better. It doesn't look like it was made by them. The master of this palace had passed away a long time ago, so there were no servants. Emo Shuyao and Yili could not use people of unknown origins when they lived here, so their basic necessities were taken care of by the shadow guards. Even though the palace's shadow guards were well trained, the food they made was only at a level that was edible. Yili propped up her chin and watched him eat. "Is it not good that I made it?" Chapter 228. Emo Shuyao paused and shook his head with a smile. "No, it's delicious." Yili nodded with satisfaction. Her cooking skills were not that good, but cooking some home-cooked dishes and porridge was not difficult for her. The chicken porridge took her 2 hours to cook. She tasted it herself and found that the taste was acceptable. "Does Miss Li have something to say to me?" Emo Shuyao put down the bowl in his hand and asked when he saw Yili's eyes staring at him. Yili took the bowl and filled it with porridge for him. She said, "I personally think that it's not good to force yourself to do everything alone. It's also not the way husband and wife should get along. What do you think, Prince?" Emo Shuyao helplessly took the bowl from her and sighed, "You know, Miss Li, it's not because of you. You know, the poison in my body can't be cured for now. It's only a matter of time before I reach this step. Whether it's because of me or not, isn't it already like this? What I'm saying is, Prince, aren't you afraid that you'll kill yourself by locking yourself in the room?" Yili raised her eyebrows and asked. "I won't." Emo Shuyao said, "I won't die. The phoenix grass won't kill me. Mr. Shen also said that it will only make me feel a little pain." Feel a little pain? Yili couldn't help but want to pry open his head to see what was inside. "Miss Li, you know that this is the best situation for now. If Mr. Shen doesn't bring back the phoenix grass, then he wouldn't be able to help Yonglin in time. Shattered Snow Pass would be broken and the people of Nanzhao would enter. Miss Li, I'll accompany you in the future." Yili said lightly. "Okay." Under a big tree in the courtyard, Emo Shuyao leaned against the tree and sat leisurely. His gentle gaze fell on the slender woman in the courtyard who was reaching out with her hand. A gleaming dagger flickered in and out of Yili's hand. Her nimble body shuttled between the wooden figurines in all sorts of postures. In just a short moment, all of the wooden figurines had obvious wounds on their necks and chests. Yili's performance was not very enjoyable. Instead, it was filled with a biting cold murderous intent. But in the eyes of the people in the courtyard, it was more captivating than any dance in the world. The shadow guards hiding in the shadows could not help but secretly swipe at their necks, wondering if they could dodge the dagger in Wang Fei's hand. Feng Zhiyao, who rarely had free time, also couldn't help but peek at Emo Xiuyao, who was sitting under the tree with a calm and even gentle expression. He cursed inside. Of all the noble misses, to be able to choose such a vicious Wang Fei for the prince, the emperor's eyes must be very bad. Li Wang's action of breaking off the engagement was correct. Otherwise he would have been beaten to death by Wang Fei. Yili put away the dagger in her hand and furrowed her brow. She was clearly dissatisfied. She turned and walked towards where Emo Xiuyao was sitting under the tree. Miss Li's internal power is slightly lacking, but her close combat skills are very good. Emo Xiuyao nodded and said with a slight smile. However, internal power could not be recovered in a short period of time. With Miss Li's status, there were not many experts that needed her to fight. At least Yi Li's present skills were far beyond Emo Xiuyao's expectations. Yi Li nodded slightly and said with a frown, "Lacking internal power is a weakness. I will think of another way. As for encountering a top expert, I will think about it later." Feng Zhiyao looked with slight terror at her. "Wang Fei, are you telling me that with your skills, you can think of a way to deal with a top expert?" Yi Li propped up her chin and said, "That depends on how high the expert is. If one palm can destroy a house 10 zhang away, then it may be difficult." Feng Zhiyao looked at the sky and rolled his eyes. Who has ever seen an expert that defies the natural order? It's impossible to reach that level, alright? What did she think power was? To be able to break a large tree with one palm was already a very high level of internal power, but to destroy a house 10 zhang away? Yi Li nodded seriously and said, "I also feel that there shouldn't be such an ability." Feng Zhiyao asked curiously, "Then how does Wang Fei want to deal with a top expert?" Yi Li blinked and said calmly, "With my own strength. It may be difficult to deal with an expert like Prince. However, it shouldn't be a problem to escape unharmed." As she spoke, Yi Li couldn't help but look at Emo Xiuyao. As a person who had been disabled for almost 10 years, even if Emo Xiuyao's martial arts hadn't deteriorated, it should have stopped at 17 or 18 years old. But she had discovered in the past few days that Emo Xiuyao's martial arts were still unfathomably deep. At least she didn't have any chance of winning against him. This made Yi Li, who had always been very confident in her own skills, feel slightly depressed. Feng Zhiyao didn't know what expression to make. "What's with your depressed and regretful face? Do you think there are many people who can escape unharmed from Prince? If it's like this, then Wang Fei's skills are enough. After all, there are no more than 3 people in the world who can compare to Prince in martial arts," Feng Zhiyao said. "Which 3? Yi Li asked curiously. Feng Zhiyao rubbed his nose and said, "Yanwang Chamber's Great Pavilion Master Ling Taihan, Shiling Genom of Gojoseon, and our Dechu State's #1 expert Mu Qingtsang. However, Genom of Gojoseon lost an arm on the battlefield, so his martial arts may have deteriorated. However, these people probably won't make a move against Wang Fei, so there's no need to worry." Yi Li rolled her eyes at him and said, "I don't have a persecutory delusion. Increasing my own strength has nothing to do with whether or not someone will make a move against me." Feng Zhiyao couldn't help but wipe his sweat. "You still want to increase your strength? If you need anything, just have someone do it. If you need people, you can just transfer them from the Shadow Guard and the Black Cloud Cavalry." Emo Xiuyao said softly. Since the future was destined to not be peaceful, he did not object to Yi Li using any method to increase her own strength. Even if it was just to protect herself, an extra bit of strength meant an extra bit of safety. Feng Zhiyao looked at Emo Xiuyao with slight surprise and raised an eyebrow. It seemed that Prince truly placed great importance on this Wang Fei. At least, the amount of authority he gave Wang Fei could be said to be the highest in the history of Princess Ding other than the first Ding country Wang Fei. No, perhaps it was not any worse than the first Princess Ding because the prince had almost tacitly given Wang Fei all authority over the Black Cloud Cavalry. Reporting to Prince Wang Fei. General Murong requests an audience. Also, the reinforcements from the court have arrived, the guard at the gate reported. Feng Zhiyao raised an eyebrow. They are not slow. Which general is leading them? The guard reported, it is General Lu Jingyun, the emperor's newly appointed bandit suppressing general. Emo Xiuyao said lightly, "Let them in." The guard hesitated and then said, "General Lu has not entered the city yet. Do you want I to personally go out of the city to welcome him?" Emo Xiuyao's voice was light, but it made people feel an invisible pressure cover the sky. The guard immediately bowed decisively and said, "This subordinate accepts the order." He turned and hurriedly left to pass the message for the prince to go out of the city to welcome him. What kind of joke was this? Who is this Lu Jingyun? Feng Jiao scratched his head and thought hard. Was the shadow guard that he had led so bad that they did not even know that the emperor had such a trusted general? Mo Xiuyao said indifferently, "Prime Minister Lu is the son of a concubine of the deceased fourth young master. He is ranked 11th in the Lu family. He should be 27 years old this year." Feng Jiao frowned. Concubine Lu's nephew? Could it be that the emperor had really gone mad from anger because of Mo Jingli? It's not like there's no one else in the court. How could they send someone who has never been on the battlefield to quell the rebellion? Even asking the old Hua Guoguo to come out of retirement is better than getting someone who can't do anything. Mo Xiuyao shook his head and said, "The emperor won't use the Hua family." Feng Jiao laughed coldly with disdain. "So he'll use the Lu family?" Of course he knew that the emperor was guarding against the Hua family. Otherwise, as the eldest daughter of the Hua family, how could the empress only have one princess? The Hua family had already reached the peak of prosperity. In the past, the Hua family had a very good relationship with Hiemo Lufeng. How could the emperor not be on guard? Chapter 229. In the eyes of the emperor, the Lu family is obviously more loyal than the Hua family and easier to control. Mo Xiuyao calmly pointed out the truth. Feng Jiao nodded and said mockingly, "Isn't that so? If the Lu family is not loyal to the emperor, how could they have been favored by the emperor all these years? Selling their daughters for glory. Based on this point, the Hua family could not compare to the Lu family. The emperor will not let a person who knows nothing control hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Lu Jingyun is just a pawn on the surface. Now that Mo Jingli has rebelled, the emperor will not trust the Yi family anymore. It is inevitable that he will support the Lu family. However, the emperor will probably support some new forces to fight against the Lu family in this short period of time." Mo Xiuyao said carelessly as if he was not worried about the war in Yonglin. "When the reinforcements arrive, we will leave Yonglin. Since the emperor wants to drag it out, let him drag it out. This war will take 3 to 5 months to finish." Murong-shen greets the prince and princess consort. Murong-shen quickly walked in and paid his respects. Mo Xiuyao nodded and said, "General, please sit down and talk. Why have you come here at this time?" Murong-shen nodded awkwardly. He looked at Mo Xiuyao and said, "I heard that the prince will leave Yonglin today. I wonder, what does the prince think about the war in Yongzhou?" Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "General, what do you mean? Once the reinforcements arrive, Shattered Snow Pass will be safe." Murong-shen sighed helplessly. He looked at Mo Xiuyao and said seriously, "I always speak frankly. Prince, please don't blame me. With the help of the prince, I believe that the rebellion of Prince Li will be quelled within a month. But why does the prince?" Mo Xiuyao shook his head with a smile. "General, you and I both know that the general is not subject to the emperor's orders when he is away. However, there were very few monarchs who could accept these words since ancient times. I'm sure you know what happened to those generals who didn't take orders from the emperor. These days, King Li's army has not moved. I am worried that King Li will send his army to the east. At that time, the people in the southeast will be involved in the war again." Murong-shen said seriously. He was a military general and only had a vague understanding of court affairs. That was why he couldn't understand why there was a better way to solve the problem. Why did they have to drag it out and let the people suffer? Mo Xiuyao shook his head and sighed, "It's too late. Mo Jingli has already split into 2 groups heading east. In fact, the reason Mo Jingli didn't make any move these days was because Mo Jingli might not be in the army anymore." Murong-shen was shocked and asked, "If so, why didn't Prince stop them?" "General." Mo Xiuyao smiled bitterly. Murong-shen immediately regretted his words. In the emperor's eyes, King Ding's residence was more terrifying than King Li's rebel army. How could he allow Prince Ding to interfere with King Li's affairs? He was afraid that once the Mahist army moved, the emperor would immediately punish Prince Ding for disobeying the emperor. At that time, hundreds of thousands of Mahist army. Murong-shen couldn't help shivering and didn't dare to think about it. The war in the southeast is inevitable. General only needs to guard Shatter Snow Pass and not let Nanzhao's army enter to join King Li. As for King Li's army in Yongzhou, They will definitely leave Yongzhou in less than a month. Will the Dechu state be divided into north and south? Murong asked silently in his heart. Was dealing with Prince Ding, who had protected the country, more important than quelling the rebel King Li? The honest General Murong naturally didn't understand that in the eyes of Emperor Mo Jingqi, Mo Xiuyao and Mo Jingli were never on the same level. As long as he could deal with Mo Xiuyao, even if there was another Mo Jingli, there was nothing to worry about. Jiangnan was occupied by Mo Jingli and he would take it back sooner or later. However, if he allowed Mo Xiuyao to occupy Jiangnan, not only would he not take it back, he would also have to guard against whether he would extend his hand to Jiangbei or even try to take over the entire Dechu state. Thus, in reality, other than his initial rage after Mo Jingqi calmed down, he was almost happy with Mo Jingli's sudden rebellion. Only then would he have a perfect reason to kill his younger brother who was born of the same mother. General Pinko has arrived. A loud voice rang out from outside the courtyard, causing everyone, including Murong Shen, to change their expressions. In front of Prince Ding, not to mention a general who had never been on the battlefield and had just been conferred the title of general, even the old Hua Duke wouldn't be so rude. Was this newly appointed general too brainless, or did he not care about Prince Ding at all? A flurry of footsteps came from afar. It was clear that there were more than one or two people. Yili tilted her head and heard the footsteps. There were at least 20 to 30 people. She couldn't help but smile. Did this General Pinko come here just to show off his prowess? Feng Jiao received Yi Li's gaze and curled his lips in disdain. Showing off in front of the prince? Was there something wrong with his head? The prince of the northern tribes who had shown off in front of Prince Ding hadn't recovered his senses yet. Just as they reached the entrance, the group was blocked. A sharp voice rang out. Impudent! General Pinko is here. Why aren't you letting us in? The guard at the entrance was not afraid. He said calmly, General, please remove your weapon. Your bodyguards are not allowed in. I am the commander-in-chief of the army. How can I remove my weapon? What does Prince Ding mean by this? A younger voice sounded with a hint of arrogance and displeasure. The guard said in a low voice, bringing weapons in without the permission of the prince will be treated as an assassination attempt. As the commander-in-chief of the army, General Pinko should know this. Please don't make things difficult for me. Hearing the commotion at the entrance, Mo Xiuyao rubbed his brows impatiently and said, Let them in. There was a moment of silence outside the courtyard. Soon two men walked in. The one in front was dressed in white, with a white battle robe and a silver scabbard sword hanging from his waist. He looked shiny. Yi Li blinked. She couldn't help but remember that Mo Xiuyao also seemed to be dressed in white like this a few days ago. She looked at the people walking over and couldn't help but laugh inwardly. Mo Xiuyao was dressed in white, riding a white horse and holding a silver spear. He did look elegant and imposing, but the person in front of her, Yi Li strangely thought of a saying. Those who liked to dress in white were all narcissists who were cold on the inside but passionate on the inside. Just as she was thinking with her head lowered, a slightly cold hand grasped her hand. Yi Li looked up at him. Mo Xiuyao looked at her with a smile. There was a hint of doubt in his eyes. Yi Li shook her head to show that it was nothing. She raised her head to look at the person she had ignored. There was nothing special about the person behind her that left a deep impression. She had to say something. It was that he was limping when he walked. Yi Li thought of a certain person who had been called an idiot by Mo Xiuyao last year. The two people stood in front of the crowd. They didn't seem to have any intention of saluting. Of course, no one here wanted to salute them. Except for Feng Jiao, no one here was lower than them. Feng Jiao wasn't a general conferred by the imperial court. Naturally, he didn't have any intention of saluting them. The courtyard was silent for a moment. Guan Ren, who was standing behind Lu Jingyun, seemed to have realized that this couldn't go on. He stood up and said, Prince, General Lu and I are here to take over Yonglin City under the orders of the Emperor. Chapter 230. Mo Xiuyao did not make things difficult for him. Nodding slightly, he turned to Feng Jiao and said, Feng San, order the Black Cloud Cavalry to withdraw from Yonglin. Yes, Prince. Wait. Guanju hurriedly stopped him. Looking somewhat arrogantly at Mo Xiuyao, he said, Prince may not have heard clearly. General Lu and I are under the Emperor's orders to take over Yonglin, including the soldiers of Yonglin City. In one sentence, not only Yonglin City, but also Yonglin City's 20,000 Black Cloud Cavalry. Everyone present sucked in a breath in their hearts. They looked at Guanju as if they were looking at a dead person. Emo Shuyao did not seem to be angry. Smiling faintly, he said, "General Guan, did the Emperor send you to provoke I?" Guanju's breathing stopped. With a stiff expression he said, "What does Prince mean by this?" The Emperor ordered Prince to lead troops to reinforce Yonglin. He did not order the Prince to be the commander-in-chief to quell the rebellion. Now that the commander-in-chief is here, shouldn't the Prince hand over the military power of Yonglin? Of course, he remembered the Emperor's orders before he left to not easily provoke Emo Shuyao. But, thinking of the humiliation Emo Shuyao gave him in the past, a trace of hatred flashed through Guanju's eyes. Raising his head, he tried to make himself appear more righteous. Murongshin frowned and said, "General Guan, Prince only ordered the Black Cloud Cavalry to withdraw. You should know that the Black Cloud Cavalry—" Guanju loudly interrupted, "Is the Black Cloud Cavalry not the army of Dechu State? Or does the Dingwa Prince want to maintain his own military power?" At the end of his words, Guanju looked at Emo Shuyao with a gaze that could almost be described as malicious. Emo Shuyao held onto the armrest and slowly stood up. Guanju was startled and couldn't help but take a step back. Emo Shuyao took 2 steady steps forward. Looking at him with a calm expression, he asked softly, "General Guan, did you think that after a few years of recuperation I's temper would be better than before?" Guanju's face paled. He stared fearfully at the frail-looking man in white. Did Emo Shuyao have a good temper? At least 9.5 out of 10 people who knew him now would think that he had a good temper. However, those who had truly known Emo Shuyao for a long time knew that this person had never been someone with a good temper. He could beat Emo Jingli up just because he tried to trip him up. He could also join forces with Feng Jiao to beat Emo Jingli up and hang him up on a tree. He could also whip Guan Jia in front of an army of several thousand without saying a word because of his poor command. This kind of temperament could not be considered good. "What do you want to do?" Guan Jia asked in fear. "If what you said just now wasn't the Emperor's idea. General Guan, do you know what punishment you will receive?" Emo Shuyao asked calmly. Guan Jia looked at Emo Shuyao in fear, but he didn't dare to say that it was Emo Jingqi's idea. Even if Emo Jingqi was crazy, he wouldn't ask Emo Shuyao for the military power of the Black Cloud Cavalry. Not to mention whether Emo Shuyao would give it to him. Even if he did, he wouldn't be able to use it. Instead, he would only cause trouble for himself. He could only look pleadingly at Lu Jingyun, who had been ignored. Although Lu Jingyun was unhappy with Prince Ding's disregard, only after seeing Prince Ding did she realize that she didn't have the aura to compete with Prince Ding. Her previous arrogance was only left with unwillingness and fear. Prince. Under Emo Shuyao's gaze, Guan Jia's expression began to tremble. Finally, as if all the strength in his body had been sucked out, he knelt down weakly on the ground. Emo Shuyao walked past him with steady steps. "Fengsang, get ready to leave." "Yes, Prince." Yili smiled and nodded to Murongshin, then followed him. Murongshin helplessly looked at the 2 new generals, sighed and turned to leave. Fortunately, this general had no subordinate relationship with him. In this case, he would take care of his own troops and guard his own pass. Lu Jingyun, who had been left behind, stared blankly at the figures disappearing outside the door. Did anyone remember that he was the new general? The Black Cloud Cavalry was indeed obedient. In less than 15 minutes after Emo Shuyao's order, the real Black Cloud Cavalry had all withdrawn from Yonglin City. The strange movements of the Black Cloud Cavalry made the opposing rebel army nervous. When they confirmed that the Black Cloud Cavalry had no intention of attacking them, they sighed in relief. But they did not dare to let down their guard. Yili and Emo Shuyao also returned to their rooms to pack and prepare to leave the city to meet with the Black Cloud Cavalry. "Wang Fei, Officer Yun requests an audience," an heir reported from outside the door. Yili raised an eyebrow, curious about Yun Ting's intentions. "Let him in." A moment later, Yun Ting walked in with a nervous expression. Yili had a good impression of this young general and smiled faintly. Yun Ting looked at Yili's light clothing and asked, "Is Wang Fei and the prince leaving soon?" Yili nodded and said, "The prince is handing over to General Lu and will leave soon." "Are Officer Yun and Officer Xia also returning to Shattered Snow Pass?" Yun Ting was slightly embarrassed. After hesitating for a while, he finally gritted his teeth and knelt on one knee, saying, "This general wants to join the Black Cloud Cavalry. Wang Fei, please take me in." Yili looked in shock at Yun Ting's determined expression. She frowned and said, "If Officer Yun wants to join the Black Cloud Cavalry, you should ask the prince." "Why are you asking me?" Yun Ting stilled and didn't know what to do. Previously he had only thought that Wang Fei was here so he could ask Wang Fei, but he had forgotten that Prince Ding was also here. This kind of matter would most likely require Prince Ding's agreement. Seeing Yun Ting's dazed state, Yili smiled faintly and said, "Why would Officer Yun want to join the Black Cloud Cavalry?" The Black Cloud Cavalry was chosen from the elites of the Mahist army. It wasn't something that could be joined just because one wanted to. Yun Ting gritted his teeth and said, "Only the Black Cloud Cavalry is the best army in the Dechu state. Yun Ting wants to join the Black Cloud Cavalry and follow the prince and Wang Fei on the battlefield." Seeing Yun Ting's serious appearance, Yili burst into laughter. "Officer Yun, you are already the most outstanding officer under General Mu Rong's command. This time you have made great contributions defending Yonglin. In a few years, you will become the youngest general in the Dechu state. If you join the Black Cloud Cavalry..." Yili shook her head and said with a smile. Yun Ting hurriedly said, "As long as I can join the Black Cloud Cavalry, Yun Ting is willing to be a normal soldier." Yili looked at him. "Officer Yun, do you know why the Black Cloud Cavalry only has several tens of thousands of people?" Yun Ting said matter-of-factly, "The Black Cloud Cavalry is the elite of the elite. Since they are the elite, they are naturally the minority." Yili nodded and said, "That's right, the Black Cloud Cavalry is the elite of the elite. But, because they are the elite, they are the minority. In a true battle, the Black Cloud Cavalry will never be the most important troops." Yun Ting did not understand. They had only heard stories since they were young about how the Black Cloud Cavalry had made great contributions and how they had turned the tides. Why was Wang Fei's explanation different? Yili smiled slightly and said, "What is the reason for the two armies to fight? To attack cities and seize land. That's right, the Black Cloud Cavalry can raid from 1,000 li, they can ambush and kill leaders. They can complete many missions that normal soldiers cannot. But, they cannot attack a city alone, nor can they defend a city alone. Therefore they are only there to support the army." Yili said softly. Chapter 231. Support. A very important support. It is the best trump card for them. They can appear in the most unlikely places. But usually they can only hide and remain unknown. "Officer Yun, have you ever heard of any famous generals from the Black Cloud Cavalry?" Yun Ting shook his head. Everyone knew that the Black Cloud Cavalry was powerful, but the generals of the Black Cloud Cavalry were always unknown. The Black Cloud Cavalry were not many, but there were still tens of thousands of them. Even though Prince Ding personally controlled them, it was impossible for Prince Ding to personally arrange everything. Yet from the day the Black Cloud Cavalry was built, it seemed to only have this name. The Black Cloud Cavalry represented everyone's name. In the history of the Dechu state, there had never been a Black Cloud Cavalry general's real name. Yili sighed softly and said, "I see that Officer Yun has a straightforward personality and is a person with great ambitions. And to have such achievements in his early 20s, his future is limitless. If he really becomes a normal member of the Black Cloud Cavalry, I'm afraid it will ruin Officer Yun's ambitions." The Black Cloud Cavalry was the true sword of the Ding Kingdom. The sword did not need to think too much. Where Prince Ding pointed was their will. In reality, it was similar to the special forces in her previous life. With Yun Ting's personality, even if he really entered, if he did not experience some hardships, he would regret it in the future. As expected, Yun Ting's face turned red. He said anxiously, "Wang Fei." Yili raised her hand to stop him. She laughed softly and said, "Don't worry. I'm not saying that you are not good. I just hope that you can think clearly. Is your ambition to be a general who can ride a horse and laugh on the battlefield, or to be a hidden arrow that hides in the shadows and attacks at the right moment?" Yun Ting was silent. He had never considered what the Wang Fei said. No wonder when he said he wanted to come and beg the Wang Fei, Xiaoshu did not support or encourage him as usual. Had he already seen that he was not suited for the Black Cloud Cavalry? But Yun Ting looked dazedly at the kind and elegant woman in front of him. Worshipping the strong, and Prince Ding and Princess Ding were undoubtedly strong. He knew that he truly wanted to follow them. What's going on? Li, Mo Shuyao slowly walked in and asked after seeing Yun Ting's conflicted expression. Yi Li smiled faintly and told him what had just happened. Mo Shuyao turned around and looked at Yun Ting for a while. Yun Ting felt a little uneasy under his stare, but he still tried his best to remain calm. What did General Murong say? Mo Shuyao asked. He had to inform General Murong Shun about the transfer. Yun Ting's heart jumped and he quickly said, General Murong said that as long as the prince and princess agree, it will be fine. Mo Shuyao muttered to himself for a moment and then said, You are not suitable to join the Black Cloud Cavalry. Yun Ting immediately felt a wave of disappointment as well as mixed feelings. Mo Shuyao continued, However, if you are willing, you can follow Li Li for now. Yun Ting and Yi Li looked at Mo Shuyao at the same time. Yi Li raised her eyebrows in confusion. Follow her for what? If she took in a military officer as a bodyguard, Yun Ting might not be her match. Mo Shuyao said, You don't have any useful people by your side. Those four are still far from being able to mobilize troops. I will have Qin Feng follow you and Yun Ting as well. Although he is still a bit impetuous, General Murong seems to think that he is a talent that can be nurtured. After a bit of training, if he is useful, we will transfer him into the Mahist army. Yi Li did not care, but Yun Ting could not hide the shock in his heart. Listening to Prince Ding's words, he was actually training a trusted aide for Princess. In the future, not only would Princess Ding be able to mobilize the Black Cloud Cavalry, she would also be able to control the hundreds of thousands of Mahist army. Many thanks to Prince, this general is willing to follow Princess. Yun Ting immediately responded. Mo Shuyao nodded, Since it is like this, you can go and say goodbye to General Murong. Follow the army and depart in an hour. Yes. Beside the Cloud-Water River, compared to Yonglin City where the two armies were still facing each other, Yi Li's group was clearly too relaxed. Once they left Yonglin City, Feng Jiao took the Black Cloud Cavalry and ran off somewhere. Yi Li and Mo Shuyao took the accompanying guards and prepared to return to Jing with Xin Yang, who had just arrived. The pitiful Xin Yang did not even have the strength to truss a chicken, but he had rushed from the Chu capital to Yongzhou in less than 10 days. But before he could even catch his breath, he was told that they were about to return to Jing. Xin Yang pointed at Mo Shuyao, his finger trembling as he panted. He did not forget to say angrily, What did I owe you Mo people in my last life? Ever since he had given the phoenix grass to a certain prince who did not listen to medical advice, Xin Yang's temper had become more and more irritable. Shen Xianxing, the group set up camp beside the Cloud-Water River. Mo Shuyao took Yun Ting and the others to go hunting. Yi Li finally had the time to find Xin Yang to talk. Xin Yang was sitting by the river holding a medical book that was thick enough to kill someone. He frowned as he read it carefully. Hearing Yi Li's figure, he turned around and wanted to stand up to greet her. Yi Li quickly waved her hand and said, There are no outsiders here. Shen Xianxing does not have to be like this. Xin Yang did not stand on ceremony and sat back down. He placed the medical book aside and smiled. Princess Consort made the Black Cloud Cavalry admire you for your prompt decision to guard Yonglin. I am also full of admiration. Princess Consort is indeed a heroine. Yi Li shook her head and smiled helplessly. Shen Xianxing does not have to be so courteous. What heroine? I was only forced by the situation. Does Shen Xianxing know why Yi Li did this? Xin Yang looked at Yi Li for a long time and finally sighed, bringing back that harmful phoenix grass. I really do not know if it was right or wrong. Yi Li shook her head and said softly, It was Prince's idea to consume the phoenix grass. Shen Xianxing has already informed the prince of the consequences. No matter what, it was Prince's choice. Furthermore, since it has already been done, there is no point in pursuing who was responsible. Yi Li only wants to know how Prince's body is now. Is there any way to solve it? Xin Yang looked at Yi Li and his eyes revealed a trace of admiration. He said seriously, In this half a year, I have carefully studied the phoenix grass and also flipped through many ancient medical books. The phoenix grass is not unique to the Eastern Sea. The phoenix grass is called phoenix tail and it grew in the Central Plains in ancient times. According to the ancient books, the phoenix grass is extremely strong and poisonous. However, it is also the nemesis of most poisons in the world. It even has the effect of cleansing the marrow, so it is called a miracle medicine. However, for some reason the phoenix grass disappeared from the Central Plains, so there is almost no record of it in the medical books. The cold poison in Prince's body is the coldest poison in the world. Although the phoenix tail can counter it, it is not enough to cure the poison. As a result, the fire and cold poisons exist in Prince's body at the same time, and it can only be said to have reached a temporary balance. However, this balance is very dangerous and it can even collapse at any time. At that time, even if there is the raging fire lotus, it will be useless. Yi Li nodded. Shen Xianxing once said that the two poisons will change in Prince's body. Xinyang said, really? If the cold poison and the phoenix tail can cancel each other out, there are other ways to think of. However, the two poisons in Prince's body are acting independently. The cold gets colder and the fire gets hotter. If a normal person were to eat the raging fire lotus seed by mistake, their internal organs would be burned to ashes in an instant. If the raging fire lotus seed were to combine with the phoenix tail, I'm afraid, before the cold poison could be cured, Prince would die of the fire poison first. Chapter 232. Yi Li frowned. Mr. Shen, is the Bai Luo grass useful to the prince? Xin Yang was startled and began to ponder. After a long time he said, Bai Luo grass and phoenix grass are both long-lost medicines. Legend has it that it can bring the dead back to life and prolong one's life to 100 years old. But whether or not it can cure the poison in the prince's body, I'm not sure. After all, the Bai Luo grass has been extinct for a longer time than the phoenix grass. I've only heard about it from my ancestors. Yi Li nodded and said, I understand, but it's always good to have more hope. Xin Yang asked curiously, could it be that the princess consort knows where the Bai Luo grass is? Yi Li nodded slightly. I'll find it as soon as possible. This matter. Mr. Shen, please don't mention it to the prince first. If she wanted to take the Bai Luo grass from the sickly scholar, she definitely couldn't use the people of the mansion. With the hatred that sickly scholar had for Mo Shuyao, he would rather not destroy the Bai Luo grass than let the people of the Prince Ding mansion get it. How long can the prince's body last? Xin Yang lowered his eyebrows and said in a low voice, as long as there are no accidents, there shouldn't be any problems within a year and a half. Furthermore, the effect of the phoenix grass is not continuous. The prince's body is indeed much better than before. But, when the moon is full, the cold and fire will come together and it will be so painful that he will wish he was dead. During summer and autumn, the fire poison will burn the body, and during spring and winter, the cold poison will attack the heart. Whether it is the cold poison or the fire poison, it will be 10 times more painful than when the cold poison acts up. Yi Li remembered the scene she saw when she stepped into the room that day. She couldn't imagine how painful it would be for someone like Mo Shuyao to be in such a sorry state. Painkillers. Xin Yang shook his head sadly. Painkillers are completely ineffective. Not only that, I'm afraid that in the future, any painkillers or even knockout drugs will be ineffective on the prince. Yi Li felt a chill in her heart. This meant that even if Mo Shuyao was injured in the future, he would not be able to use painkillers or anesthetics. Mr. Li. Yi Li turned around and saw the white-robed man walking towards her with a smile. She lowered her eyes to hide the worry in her eyes as she walked up to him. Mo Shuyao looked at Xin Yang, who had already picked up the medical book and was preparing to continue reading. He lowered his head and smiled at Yi Li. What is Mr. Li talking about with Mr. Shen? Yi Li smiled and said, I'm asking Mr. Shen about some herbal medicine. Didn't you see several strange herbs in Nanzhao this time? Ask Mr. Shen what they are used for. Mo Shuyao smiled slightly. Li Li has a wide range of interests. She's even interested in medicine? Yi Li shook her head. I don't have much talent in medicine, but I do have some knowledge of herbal medicine. Mo Shuyao pulled Yi Li towards the camp. As he walked, he smiled and said, I know. I heard that you have your people memorize herbal medicine books and follow the doctors to identify herbs. Yi Li smiled and said, it's just some common herbs. You can't always carry them around with you, right? Mr. Li is right. Maybe we can have the Black Cloud Cavalry follow them and learn. Mo Shuyao thought. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, the Black Cloud Cavalry is not the same as them. They only need a certain number of doctors to follow them, or they themselves are doctors. Mo Shuyao looked down at Yi Li and said, does Mr. Li have some special idea that you don't want to tell me? Yi Li shook her head. No, it's just a prototype. When I finish it, maybe I can give you a surprise. Emo Shuyao smiled faintly and said, "Then I will wait for Mr. Li's surprise. Let's go eat. Then we will go watch a play." The play that Emo Shuyao spoke of was a good play. There were more than 30,000 soldiers hidden in Yongzhou and Yongzhou. Yili finally knew why Feng Jiao had taken the 20,000 Black Cloud cavalry. In one night, many mountain strongholds in Yongzhou and Yongzhou were destroyed. Countless people who had disguised themselves as bandits but were clearly well-trained were killed by the Black Cloud cavalry. The rest fled in panic towards the border between Yongzhou and Xiling. Emo Shuyao led Yili and the others to wait at the border. When the group of happy remnant soldiers saw the dense armored cavalry, their eyes couldn't help but reveal looks of despair. The Yongzhou officials all knelt on the ground with ashen faces, trembling as they looked at the beautiful couple sitting side by side in front of them. The man was gentle and elegant, the woman elegant and graceful. However, in their eyes they were even more terrifying than man-eating demons. 2 days ago they were invited to Prince Ding's side by a token. Prince Ding didn't say anything, only bringing them along. Wherever Prince Ding went they would follow. They watched helplessly as the mountain strongholds were destroyed by the Black Cloud cavalry one after another. The 20,000 people in front of the Black Cloud cavalry were like ants, not worth a mention. These remnant soldiers in front of them were already the last fish that escaped the net. However, they were still stopped by Prince Ding on this small hill less than 5 li from the border. Emo Shuyao calmly looked at the Yongzhou governor who was kneeling closest to him, calmly asking, "Sir, do you know why the Yongzhou governor died?" The Yongzhou governor's face paled, saying with a trembling voice, "Rebellion, rebellion." The Yongzhou governor was still killed by the Ding King's shadow guard even under the protection of King Li's powerful army. This matter had already spread throughout the world before today. It also made many officials tense up in their minds. Emo Shuyao said with a faint smile, "Rebellion? Correct, this is indeed a capital offense. Then, does Sir know what kind of offense it is to betray the country?" Prince, this small official doesn't dare. This small official is loyal and devoted to the Dechu state. Loyal and devoted? Emo Shuyao said with a cold laugh, "Loyal and devoted? Where did these 10,000 people in your Yongzhou come from? Why did General Wu Qingliang and the 20,000 soldiers in Yongzhou die?" This small official truly does not know? The Yongzhou governor cried out. "This small official is innocent. I beg Prince to judge clearly," Emo Shuyao said calmly. "I don't care if you are innocent or not. You can tell the emperor yourself. I invited you here today to let you see the Black Cloud cavalry pay tribute to the Yongzhou governor and General Wu's spirit. Even though the civil officials and military generals do not have subordinates, they can still be considered colleagues. Everyone here should also send them on their way." Feng Jiao, who was standing behind Emo Shuyao, waved his hand. 10,000 arrows were released. The remnant Western Tomb soldiers who were trapped in the center immediately fell to the ground and died. The officials kneeling on the ground smelled the pungent smell of blood in the air. One by one they fought to be the first to vomit. Emo Shuyao acted as if he did not see it. He pulled Yili up and turned his head to order, "Send the officials back to their respective manners. Also, throw these Western Tomb people out of the border. Do not pollute my Dechu state's land." "As you command." Emo Shuyao nodded his head in satisfaction. He turned his head and smiled at Yili. "Yili, we should return to the capital." Yili nodded her head slightly and followed Emo Shuyao. What about not killing captives? There seemed to be no need to say. Even though he had received the emperor's urgent order to return to the capital, Emo Shuyao clearly did not take it to heart. Instead he had Feng Jiao leave with the Black Cloud cavalry. He himself took Yili and the others and leisurely headed north. They spent close to 10 days to reach Guangling City. Because she did not have a purpose in coming to Guangling City for the second time, Yili appeared much more relaxed. Only when Emo Shuyao brought her to stand in front of the Wind and Moon Pavilion did she look back at the man beside her with some surprise. Chapter 233. Emo Shuyao smiled but didn't say a word. The Wind and Moon Inn wasn't open for business during the day. However, there was still someone at the door to welcome them. Looking at the young man standing at the door with a serious expression, Emo Shuyao said indifferently, "The Tianyi Pavilion is indeed well informed. It seems that Han Mingyue hasn't wasted her time all these years." The young man's smile was a bit stiff. Thank you for your praise, Prince. My superior ordered me to welcome the prince and princess consort here. Please come in. After entering the Wind and Moon Inn, the young man led them directly to the backyard. It was still the same pavilion where Yi Li saw Han Mingxi last time. Han Mingxi and Han Mingyue sat facing each other. Seeing Yi Li, Han Mingxi's eyes flashed with a trace of absent-mindedness. When he came back to his senses, he raised his eyebrows and smiled at her. Han Mingyue put down his teacup and stood up to welcome them. His smile was gentle and elegant. Xiao, long time no see. You're really good. Without waiting for him to finish speaking, Emo Xiao directly waved his palm. The fierce wind from his palm attacked the elegant man with earth-shattering force. Han Mingyue's voice suddenly stopped. He awkwardly flipped over and dodged Emo Xiao's palm. However, the fierce wind from the palm still made him unable to breathe. He coughed a few times before smiling bitterly. Xiao, long time no see. Is this how you treat me? Emo Xiao snorted softly. He stepped forward and continuously attacked. Every palm strike was real and there was absolutely no intention of joking about it. Han Mingyue could only withdraw his smile and carefully deal with it. The two of them fought back and forth in the garden. While the fight was in full swing, Han Mingxi also stood up and walked to Yi Li's side. He raised his eyebrows and smiled. Junwei, long time no see. Are you here to see me? If you want to look at me, just do it yourself. Why did you bring him along? Yi Li pointed at the man in white in the garden, indicating that he wanted to come. Han Mingxi glanced sideways and the smile on his face was a little forced. Junwei, Yi Li said calmly, don't worry, Prince won't kill him. If he really wanted Han Mingyue's life, Emo Xiao wouldn't have to do it himself. No matter how powerful the Tianyi Pavilion was, could they stop the Black Cloud Cavalry or the Shadow Guard of the Ding King's mansion? Han Mingxi smiled bitterly. But Prince Ding has no intention of showing mercy. Emo Xiao was only in his 20s, but in Feng Jiao's eyes, there wasn't a single expert who could be compared to him. One could only imagine the distance between him and Han Mingyue. While the two of them were talking, Han Mingyue had already been slapped to the ground. He fell not far from the two of them and spat out a mouthful of blood. Yi Li could tell with a glance that two of his ribs were broken. Han Mingxi hurriedly went forward to help him up, but Han Mingyue waved his hand to stop him. He looked up at Emo Xiao, who was strolling over, and asked, Xiao, have you calmed down? Emo Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly. Do you know why I didn't kill you this time? Han Mingyue raised his eyebrows and looked at Emo Xiao. Emo Xiao said calmly, since Li promised Han Mingxi to let you go, I will let you go this time. However, you better remember that I have a limit to my patience. If you make a move against Li again, you might as well try and see how far I can go. Han Mingyue clutched his chest and coughed violently. He looked at Emo Xiao helplessly and said, Xiao, in your eyes, is Yi Li more important than our friendship since childhood? Emo Xiao raised his eyebrows and his lips curled into a mocking smile. In your eyes, when have you ever thought that our friendship since childhood was important? Han Mingyue was speechless. That's right, he had betrayed their friendship first. However, in my eyes, you will always be my best friend. Han Mingyue said in a low voice. Emo Xiao snorted and said calmly, since you called me your friend, I promise you, the next time you offend I won't kill you. Han Mingyue was stunned, but her expression changed when she saw Han Mingxi and Yi Li's curiosity and confusion. Xiao, don't. This has nothing to do with her. This was all my idea. Hearing his words, Han Mingxi's face immediately darkened. She snorted unhappily and swallowed back the words she was about to say. In any case, Prince Ding didn't plan on killing him. Just torment him until he didn't have the energy to run around. Emo Xiao wasn't interested in whose idea it was. He turned to Han Mingxi and said, if you want him to live well, then keep a close eye on him. Han Mingxi's handsome face was ugly as he coldly said, Prince doesn't need to worry. Emo Xiao held Yi Li's hand and prepared to leave. Han Mingyue on the ground opened her mouth and said, Xiao, you specially took a detour to Guangling. It can't be that you want to beat me up, right? Emo Xiao stopped in his tracks and turned to look at her, saying, by the way, I'll tell you something. If you don't know how to play politics, then earn your money. Don't shoot yourself in the foot and cry about it later. Seeing the two leave without looking back, Han Mingyue couldn't help but frown as she thought about Emo Xiao's words. Don't know how to play politics. He really didn't have any interest in politics and had never gotten involved before. Ui. Her expression changed. Han Mingyue turned to Han Mingxi and said, "Quick. Send someone to investigate what happened in Xiling." Han Mingxi only felt the veins on his forehead throbbing. Who said that young master you was smarter than others? He was already dumber than a donkey, okay? Others wouldn't turn back unless they hit a wall, but he still wouldn't turn back even if his head was broken and bleeding. Investigate my ass. This young master is a citizen of Dechu State. Why should I care about the life and death of Xiling? Someone bring me the best tendon softening powder. If anyone dares to give him the antidote, this young master will skin them. I've seen what it means to be a femme fatale. I don't believe that other than that slut, there aren't any other women in this world. This prince will go and disfigure her tomorrow. When no one wants her anymore, this prince will buy her back to be your servant girl. After he finished speaking, Han Mingxi couldn't be bothered to care about his older brother who was still stuck on the ground and couldn't move. He flicked his sleeves and left in a huff. Han Mingxi, stop right there. Han Mingyue said sternly. Han Mingxi's rushing body paused. He turned around and gnashed his teeth as he waited for his older brother who was 70% similar to him. In his heart he wanted nothing more than to pull out that femme fatale's tendons and skin him alive. He had worshipped his older brother since he was young, but he didn't dare to compliment his older brother's taste in women. Seeing Han Mingxi's cold and angry glare, Han Mingyue's eyes flashed with a trace of guilt. Her voice softened as she said, "Mingxi, don't make a fuss. Big brother promises that he won't do anything else. Emo Xiao broke 2 of my ribs. Come and help me up." Han Mingxi was stunned. Seeing Han Mingyue's deathly pale face, his heart softened and he went forward to help his older brother up. Han Mingyue. After a moment, Han Mingxi's voice was filled with anger and resentment. Unfortunately, his entire body was frozen and he couldn't move. His handsome face was twisted as he stared at the man in front of him who was clutching his chest with a deathly pale face. Han Mingyue's eyes were filled with guilt as she looked at her younger brother. "I'm sorry, Mingxi." Seeing that he was about to turn around and leave, Han Mingxi cried out in despair. "Han Mingyue, you idiot, I've been poisoned. You really want Yili to kill me?" Han Mingyue turned to look at him with a smile and shook her head. "You really are a foolish child. Mingxi, since you boast that you're better at judging people than I am, how can you not see that Yili won't kill you? She didn't poison you either?" Han Mingxi said coldly, "So these past few days, you've been trying to determine if there's any poison in my body. Now that you've confirmed it, you want to leave?" Chapter 234. Don't worry, I won't make a move on your friend again. Mo Xiao. I can't afford to offend him. Han Mingyue looked at her brother gently. After thinking for a while, she warned, "Mingxi, stay away from Yili. She's not someone you can afford to offend." Han Mingxi's face stiffened. He said disdainfully, "Are you qualified to say that?" Han Mingyue shook her head helplessly. "Do you think you're smarter than me? Mingxi, I can fight with anyone in the world, but I've never thought of fighting with Xuyao. Do you know?" Han Mingxi sneered. "Yes, you can choose your opponent, but unfortunately, you don't know how to choose a woman. Besides using you, has that woman ever looked you in the eye? Even if Junwei doesn't like me, she would at least save me. She would feel guilty for me and show mercy to you because of me. What have you gained all these years?" The smile on Han Mingyue's face gradually turned bitter and helpless. In the end, she had no choice but to admit that her brother was right. She could only turn and leave silently. After a long time, the young man who led the way appeared in the garden. "Second young master, the young master has left." Han Mingxi, who had just had his acupoints unsealed, was extremely irritated. "So what if he's gone? When has he ever treated us as equals?" The young man lowered his head and said, "The young master said he won't return. The Wind and Moon Pavilion and all the banknotes in the bank have been left to the second young master. The Tianyi Pavilion will no longer listen to the second young master's orders. He's already made his plans. If it wasn't for Prince Ding's visit today, was he intending to leave without a sound?" "Han Mingyue, you're ruthless." Han Mingxi clenched his teeth. The young man lowered his head and didn't say anything. Han Mingxi snorted coldly. "Slut, just you wait." In the best inn in Guangling, Yili and her group had booked the best courtyard in the inn for the time being. "Xiuyao, today you..." Looking at the man beside her who had his head lowered as he read, Yili frowned slightly and asked with some hesitation. Emo Xiao put down his book and smiled. Lily wants to ask why I went to look for Han Mingyue? Yili nodded. If it was just to beat him up to vent her anger, it would be too troublesome. Emo Xiao said indifferently, if I'm not wrong, Han Mingyue will be heading to West Hill very soon. To the West Hill? Emo Xiao nodded. That's right. Rather than letting him leave quietly, I might as well send him on his way. Although the Han family wasn't ranked at the top in Dechu State, they were at least in the top 10. If he brought them all to West Hill, it wouldn't be a good thing. Yili's eyes flashed. You're saying that Han Mingyue wants to? She didn't say the word treason, but Emo Xiao nodded indifferently. I understand Han Mingyue. The country and the world are nothing in his eyes. To him, there's no difference if you become a citizen of Dechu State to a citizen of West Hill or a citizen of the northern tribes. If that's the case, why not eliminate him completely? Yili didn't understand. Even if Emo Xiao really valued his friendship with Han Mingyue, he definitely wouldn't see him as more important than the Dechu State. Emo Xiao smiled faintly. The Tianyi Pavilion is spread throughout the 4 countries. Once Han Mingyue is killed, there'll be a lot of trouble. If he wants to leave, then let him leave. I've said before that he's not suited for politics. Since he's openly committed treason, then there's no need for us to leave the Dechu State. In that case, there is no need for the Tianyi Pavilion to exist within the borders of Great Chu. The most important reason why he came to Guangling was to wipe out the Tianyi Pavilion. The southern part of Dechu State, especially Guangling City, was the Tianyi Pavilion's headquarters. How could it be so easy for Han Mingyue to withdraw his people and carriages from under his nose? Han Mingxi? Yili asked with a frown. Emo Xiao said, if we use another method, Han Mingxi might leave with Han Mingyue. But today he won't be able to leave. If Han Mingxi is really smart, he'll come to me. Yili looked at him. You're deliberately provoking Han Mingyue so that he'll act in advance and drive a wedge between the 2 brothers? Emo Xiao didn't deny it. He rubbed between his eyebrows tiredly and said, it's a good thing that Han Mingxi stays. If they both leave, the entire Han family can only be executed. Han Mingyue and his brother weren't the only members of the Han family. No matter which big family, main family, branch family, or main family, they couldn't take everyone away. Once all of them were connected, the scope of the implications was shocking to the eye. Han Mingyue will side with the West Hill Imperial Court? He's not an ordinary person. The Han family is a big family and the Tianyi Pavilion is even more involved. As long as he goes to West Hill, whether it's the Emperor of Xiling or the Genom of Gojoseon, they'll definitely try to rope him in. Whether he'll be used by them or not, in the eyes of the Imperial family, he's already a traitor. The Imperial family couldn't tolerate sand in their eyes. As long as Han Mingyue went to West Hill, it would be a betrayal. Even if he didn't betray the country, the Imperial family would rather kill the wrong person than let him go. Yili sighed speechlessly. She still couldn't understand Han Mingyue. Han Mingyue, is he doing this for a woman? Emo Xiao was stunned. He raised his head and looked at Yili for a long time. Finally, he nodded and said, yes, it's indeed for a woman. Yili frowned. She felt that this woman's identity was special. She hesitated whether or not she should continue this topic. Emo Xiao looked at her quietly. His smile was calm and warm. Yili, you can ask anything you want to know. This woman, is someone you know? Emo Xiao nodded. Just as he was about to speak, San reported from outside, Princess Consort. Young Master Han requests an audience. Emo Xiao raised an eyebrow slightly. He looked apologetically at Yili and said, let him in. When Han Mingxi came in, he looked like a completely different person from his usual playful and flamboyant appearance. His originally handsome and slightly evil smile had disappeared. Right now he looked more tired and gloomy, and seemed to have some grievance and disappointment from being abandoned. Yili could only sigh silently inside. Emo Xiao had made the decision he thought was most appropriate. Han Mingyue had chosen the person he thought was most important. As for Han Mingxi, from the beginning to the end he was the most innocent one. Princess Consort. Han Mingxi's voice was slightly stiff. Emo Xiao nodded slightly and said calmly, young Master Han, please sit. Han Mingxi sat down without a word. His gaze passed lightly over Yili's body and paused for a moment before returning to Emo Xiao. Prince already knew of my big brother's plans? Staring at Emo Shuyao, Han Mingxi asked rudely. Emo Shuyao nodded and said, Han Mingyue understands me and I understand him. So, I can roughly guess what kind of decision he will make for someone or something. But he probably did not expect me to come so quickly. Han Mingxi was silent. Yes, if Emo Shuyao had not suddenly come to Guangling, perhaps Han Mingyue would have suddenly disappeared after arranging everything at night or during the day. But now Han Mingyue, whose plans had been disrupted, could only sneak attack Han Mingxi and then leave in a hurry. But he left behind a huge mess for his little brother who had been spoiled since childhood. Then young Master Han, what plans do you have in coming to CI? Emo Shuyao asked in a low voice. Chapter 235. Han Mingxi stared at him and asked, if I don't have any plans, what does Prince plan to do? Emo Shuyao lowered his eyes and said, the Tianyi Pavilion spies in Guangling and in Dechu State will all be eradicated in 3 days. As for the Han family, I do not have the authority to punish them. However, if the decree from the capital really comes, Sir Han should know what the contents will be. 9. Familial extermination. Han Mingxi murmured bitterly. Big brother, for that woman, do you think you don't care about me or the Han family at all? The hall was silent for a moment. Han Mingxi finally raised his head and said to Emo Shuyao, the Han family has already expelled Han Mingyue from the family. From now on, Han Mingyue is no longer a member of the Han family in Guangling. Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows slightly. Who said that Han Mingxi was useless? Based on his decisiveness, Han Mingxi was definitely more suitable than Han Mingyue to be in charge of the Han family. Emo Shuyao nodded. Since that is the case, I will also write to the emperor to declare the Han family's innocence. Han Mingyue lowered her eyes and said faintly, many thanks to Prince. Although he did not have a good impression of Emo Shuyao, Han Mingxi could not help but thank him. Even if the Han family and Han Mingyue broke off their relationship, once Han Mingyue really worked for Shilin in the future, the Han family would still not be able to escape the fate of being punished. Even if they were lucky enough to escape, the expenses needed to clear up the relationship would be enough to destroy the Han family. With Prince Ding's words, even the emperor would not question the Han family's innocence. The Ding kingdom and the 3 surrounding countries could be said to have a deep hatred. Even if the emperor himself colluded with the enemy, Prince Ding would not collude with the enemy. I have one more thing to ask of Prince and Princess Consort. Sir, please speak, Emo Shuyao said. A trace of determination flashed through Han Mingxi's eyes. He looked at Yi Li and said, as the head of the Han family, Han Mingxi is willing to follow Prince and Princess Consort. Following as the head of the Han family meant that the entire Han family would support the Ding kingdom. What are the conditions? Emo Shuyao asked. Han Mingxi had made such a huge bet, of course not without conditions. Han Mingxi said in a deep voice, I only ask. If Big Brother lands in the hands of Wang Yi in the future, I ask Wang Yi to be magnanimous and spare his life. Han Mingxi was very clear that with Han Mingyue's future identity and position, it was impossible for her to not go against the Ding King's residence. At the same time, he was also clear that his eldest brother was far from being Prince Ding's opponent. Not only because his martial arts and wisdom were slightly inferior to Prince Ding's, but also because he did not have Princess Ding's assistance. That slut would only cause trouble for his eldest brother. Emo Shuyao chuckled in a low voice. Young Master Han is indeed loyal. Since young Master Han has so much confidence in this king, as you wish. If Sir Han has any matters in the future, just follow Princess Li's wishes and do it. Han Mingxi looked at Emo Shuyao with surprise and then looked at Yi Li, who was sitting beside him. He bowed his head and said, this subordinate obeys. I have disturbed Prince and Princess Consort. Farewell. Seeing Han Mingxi stand up and leave, Emo Shuyao thought for a while and suddenly said, Han Mingyue dared to let go so easily because he knows I's way of doing things. He knows that I will not harm the foundation of the Han family. Han Mingxi's feet paused for a moment and then he walked out of the hall without looking back. Why did you tell him this? And let him listen to me? Yi Li looked at Emo Shuyao and asked in confusion. Emo Shuyao smiled and said, Han Mingyue is loyal, Han Mingxi is also loyal. But Han Mingyue is more loyal while Han Mingxi is more loyal to his brothers. My tone will let him know that I is scheming against his Han family's power one day, so I might as well tell him directly now. He is a smart person and knows what to choose. As for Princess Li, since she is already involved in this dispute, no one can withdraw. Princess Li, you need to have enough strength to protect yourself. Even if you don't have me, no one will dare to touch your strength. Also, Han Mingxi is arrogant and a bit of a schemer. If he refuses to obey me, even if he is loyal to me, he will have to obey me in public but oppose me in private. I don't think he will harm you. The princess Li. As if thinking of something, Emo Shuyao looked at Yi Li with a serious expression. Yi Li raised her eyebrows. Emo Shuyao's voice was gentle and elegant. You can't be too good to him. Otherwise. Yi Li felt a bit uncomfortable under his strange gaze and asked. Otherwise I will kill him. Emo Shuyao said in a low voice, but Yi Li could hear the seriousness in his words. At least not while I am alive. Yi Li's heart trembled. She reached out to hold his hand and said seriously, you will be fine. Emo Shuyao smiled faintly and stopped talking about this topic. Alright, Princess Li. Let's continue talking about what we were talking about. Yi Li's memory was not bad. She raised her eyebrows and looked at Emo Shuyao and asked, what kind of woman can make someone like Han Mingyue so obsessed? Not to mention how many women Han Mingyue had seen as the owner of the Wind and Moon Inn. Which of the women in the Wind and Moon Inn wasn't multi-talented and beautiful? What kind of peerless beauty could make a man like Han Mingyue so infatuated? Emo Shuyao looked at Yi Li and said in a deep voice, Suzuodi. 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 Yi Li was a bit shocked. Suzuodi is not dead? Emo Shuyao nodded faintly as if he did not care that his ex-fiancé was not dead. He also did not care that his former good friend Han Mingyue was obsessed with his ex-fiancé. In just a moment Yi Li's mind was filled with countless thoughts and thoughts. After a while she asked, the person who wanted Han Mingyue to kidnap me last year was Suzuodi? She is now in West Hill, and she has something to do with the Emperor of Shiling's wife? Emo Shuyao looked at Yi Li apologetically and nodded. Yi Li could not help but rub her eyebrows as she analyzed the information she knew in her mind. Suzuodi died 3 months after Emo Shuyao was seriously injured. But now she was in West Hill and she was very likely to be the wife of the Emperor of Shiling. Han Mingyue and Emo Shuyao were good friends, but he was also in love with Suzuodi. After Suzuodi died, Han Mingyue and Emo Shuyao broke off, but it was obvious that Han Mingyue had betrayed Emo Shuyao. In other words, Han Mingyue and Suzuodi had done something to betray Emo Shuyao. But there shouldn't be any secret relationship between the two. Judging from Han Mingxi's attitude towards Suzuodi, Suzuodi should be using Han Mingyue. Miss Su's death was due to Han Mingyue's help? Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows slightly and smiled faintly. Li Li is indeed quick-witted. Yi Li smiled faintly. It's not hard to guess. To be able to hide the fact that Miss Su is still alive from so many people, one must have great power. But although Elder Su is highly respected, the Su family does not have much power in the capital. If you didn't help Miss Su fake her death, then only the Tianyi Pavilion's master, who was very close to Miss Su and admired her, could do it. You wouldn't do such a boring thing, right? Judging from his attitude towards Suzuodi, he didn't seem like someone who would easily let his fiancée fake her death to escape the marriage. Emo Shuyao's expression was not very good, but there was no anger or resentment. He simply didn't want to talk about it. Yi Li tilted her head and thought. Actually, compared to why Miss Su faked her death, I'm more curious about why she went to West Hill after faking her death. If she simply didn't want to marry a seriously injured and disabled person like Emo Shuyao, she could have found a Mr. Right in Dechu State with her beauty after faking her death, or she could have simply been together with Han Mingyue. Leaving some aspects aside, Han Mingyue was definitely one of the best Mr. Right in the eyes of women. Judging from Emo Shuyao's attitude towards Suzuodi and Han Mingyue all these years, even if the two of them were really together, Emo Shuyao probably wouldn't retaliate. A lady from a noble family who had lived in the capital since she was young, but after faking her death she ran thousands of miles to West Hill State. Chapter 236. Is it convenient to talk about Miss Su's current identity? Yi Li asked curiously. Noble Consort Qingrong of the Shiling Kingdom by Long, Noble Consort Qingrong? Yi Li raised her eyebrows. Even if she had no general knowledge, she still remembered that the title of Noble Consort seemed to have only one word. So Suzuodi's status in the Shiling Kingdom was not low. Looking at Emo Shuyao, Yi Li decided not to ask. She only needed to know that between her and Su Zuidi, Emo Xiuyao was definitely on her side. As for the noble consort Qingrong of Xiling, who obviously had feelings for Emo Xiuyao, or was somewhat unwilling to give up, it was better for her to think about it herself. It was obviously not a good topic to discuss with her husband about his ex-fiancée. Yili decided not to talk about it, but Emo Xiuyao did not think so. He said calmly, "The Bai family is one of the 4 major surnames in the Xiling kingdom. Most of the empresses and noble consorts of the Xiling kingdom were from the Bai family. This included the current emperor of Xiling's empress. Bai Long entered the palace 7 years ago. At that time she was named Consort Rong and was favored by the emperor of Xiling. After the empress passed away, she was named noble consort Qingrong. If the emperor of Xiling had not personally asked the emperor of Xiling to name noble consort Hui, who was also from the Bai family, as his empress, she would have been the emperor of Xiling's empress by now." Yili was silent. In less than 10 years she went from being the second son of the Prince Ding mansion of Dechu State to almost being the empress of the emperor of Xiling. It had to be said that Miss Su's life was very legendary. Looking at Emo Xiuyao's expression, Yili hesitated and asked, "Did you know later that she was not dead, or did you know all along?" Emo Xiuyao's lips sank slightly and said, "At that time, I had not recovered from my injury. When I knew Han Mingyue was about to take her out of the capital." "You didn't do anything?" Yili was curious. With Emo Xiuyao's original personality, even if he didn't immediately kill Han Mingyue and Su Zuidi, he wouldn't let them leave the capital unharmed. Or if Emo Xiuyao really loved Su Zuidi, he wouldn't have let her leave the capital. Emo Xiuyao glanced at her. "I was in a bad mood at the time, so I did intend to kill them. However, Elder Su rushed over and personally knelt on the ground to beg me. Elder Su is my first teacher. Su Zuidi's father saved my elder brother's life. Her elder brother also died in that battle to save me. After I calmed down, I let them go." Yili nodded silently. If anyone told her that Emo Xiuyao loved Su Zuidi to the bone again, she would throw them into the water to wash their eyes. The man's voice was as calm as a stranger's. However, even a beauty like Su Zuidi couldn't move Emo Xiuyao's heart. "Have you ever liked Su Zuidi?" Emo Xiuyao looked at Yili in surprise. He nodded with a faint smile and said, "Of course I have." Yili slightly knit her brows and ignored the uneasiness in her heart. "Then why now?" Emo Xiuyao interrupted her and said, "She is my fiancée. We grew up together and she might even be my wife in the future. Moreover, she is very beautiful, talented, and has a good temperament. Why don't I like her? However, she always seems to think that I am not good enough for her. After I was injured, she wanted to fake her death and leave. Because of her father and brother, I let her go. Then we don't have any relationship anymore, right?" Yili nodded. To sum up Emo Xiuyao's words, Emo Xiuyao had once felt that Su Zuidi was a perfect fiancé. The men in the Ding King's residence had always been faithful, and it wasn't just a matter of love. As long as they recognized their wife, they would treat her well. So this was the so-called truth of mutual love that was spread in the capital. Since Su Zuidi chose to leave in the end, she naturally had nothing to do with Emo Xiuyao. So in the eyes of Emo Xiuyao now, Su Zuidi was just a stranger. She could even be an enemy now. Guangling City itself did not have many things to deal with. But Han Mingxi's actions were very swift. On the same day, the news of Han Mingyue being expelled from the Han family and that the Han family had changed hands with the second young master came out of Guangling City. Even the people of Guangling City did not know much about Han Mingxi. They only knew that the Han family had this second young master and nothing else. Now that the Han family had changed hands, all the wealthy merchants and officials in Guangling City naturally had to pay attention. In this somewhat unexpected hubbub, Emo Xiuyao and Yili quietly left Guangling City and headed towards the Chu capital. Just as they returned to the capital, Emo Xiuyao was summoned by the emperor to the palace to discuss matters. Yili did not care about how Emo Xiuyao would explain her disappearance and appearance in Yonglin City. She was already entangled by the people in the palace who were concerned about her. With great difficulty she managed to appease the wet nurse and Mother Lin. After listening to Steward Mo and Mother Sun report on the recent affairs of the Ding Palace, Yili was thinking of going to see Qing Wan and Qing Yu, who were still recuperating, when a servant came to report that Lord Yi and old Madam Yi were asking for an audience. Compared to last year's flush of success, This year's Minister Yi could be said to be covered in dark clouds. At the beginning of the year, Princess Ding's third daughter went missing in the palace. The Zhaoyi's second daughter and little grandson were burned to death. Not even 2 months had passed and the Yi family had not recovered yet. The fourth son-in-law suddenly rebelled. Although the emperor had not yet vented his anger on the Yi family, Minister Ye's days were not so good. Occasionally Minister Yi could not help but wonder if the heavens did this to him because they did not like him. Therefore, after hearing the news that Prince Ding and Princess Ding had both returned to the capital, Minister Yi did not care about putting on the airs of a father and waited for Yi Li to come home to pay his respects. He directly brought old Madame Yi to the door. Yi Li stepped into the reception pavilion and saw Minister Yi and old Madame Ye's obviously old and haggard appearance. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Father, grandmother. Li, you finally came back safe and sound." Grandmother was worried to death. Old Madame Yi pulled Yi Li to tears. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "I made grandmother worry. It's Li's fault." Minister Yi looked at this daughter strangely. He always felt that something was not right. Although he was not very willing to get along with this daughter since his wife passed away, this did not prevent him from knowing Yi Li's situation. This third daughter was quiet and did not like to talk since childhood. But like his wife, she seemed to be born with the grace and elegance of a noble family. But this time when he saw her, Minister Yi keenly found that there seemed to be something between her eyebrows. Even if she was just sitting quietly and letting old Madame Yi hold her hand with a quiet smile, Minister Yi clearly felt a sense of sharpness and pressure that he had never felt before. He could not help but think of the rumors he heard before about Princess Ding suddenly appearing in Yongzhou and helping General Murong to guard Yonglin. Although not many people knew this news, Minister Yi was the Emperor, Prince Li and Prince Ding's father-in-law. Naturally, he had some unknown channels of information. The credibility of the information he received was definitely much more real than the rumors outside. Looking at the gentle woman with a smile in front of him, Minister Ye's heart was filled with mixed feelings. He had a daughter who hid it well. This daughter even hid it from him, her father, and he used her as an abandoned pawn. Chapter 237. How have father and grandmother been recently? After the servants served tea and left, Yi Li asked softly. Minister Yi froze for a moment and looked at Yi Li's expression before replying, "They're fine, but your fourth sister, she?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows. "Prince Li didn't take fourth sister with him when he left the capital?" Minister Yi shook his head. Fortunately, Mo Jingli didn't take Yi Ying away. Otherwise, the Yi family and Prince Li wouldn't be able to escape the crime of conspiring to rebel. Although Yi Ying was now under house arrest, the emperor finally believed that the Yi family didn't wallow in the mire with Prince Li. Yi Li lowered her head and thought for a moment before asking, "Who did Prince Li take with him when he left the capital?" Minister Yi had nothing to hide and said in a deep voice, "He only took that woman from Nanjiang. Even consort Xianzhao was left in the capital. The Empress Dowager has already brought consort Xianzhao to the palace. But now that Prince Li has rebelled, the Empress Dowager's life isn't easy." Thinking of this, Minister Yi felt regret in his heart. It was true that he was the Empress Dowager's man and he was biased towards Prince Li. But he never thought that Prince Li would suddenly rebel. If he had known that Prince Li was so crazy, he would have followed the emperor wholeheartedly. At least he had a Zhaoyi daughter and a prince's grandson. Now he had nothing. Fourth sister is under house arrest by the emperor? Yi Li raised her eyebrows and asked, "Why didn't Prince Li take her away? After all, she is his legal wife. Prince Li shouldn't not know what will happen to her if he leaves her in the capital." Minister Yi sighed helplessly and said, "Ying is already 2 months pregnant. It's not suitable for a long journey." Yi Li's mind turned. She looked up at Minister Yi and old Madame Yi and smiled faintly. "Prince Li doesn't know that fourth sister is pregnant, right? No matter how cruel Mo Jingli was, he wouldn't abandon his own flesh and blood, not to mention that Yi Ying was pregnant with his only child. The only possibility was that he did not know that Yi Ying was pregnant, and Yi Ying had found an excuse to stay. Old Madame Yi felt a bit guilty under her gaze and said embarrassedly, "That Princess Xixia isn't a good person and Prince Li spoils her too much. With Ying-er's scheming, the child would be gone before she could even reach Lingzhou. In any case, Prince Li spends most of his time in the capital every year, so we thought of letting Ying-er stay in the capital to wait for delivery." How could Yi Li not understand old Madame Ye's intentions? Yi Zhaoyi and the little prince in the palace had died. Ying finally had Prince Li's child. Naturally, she wanted to keep the child in the capital so that the child could be close to the Yi family in the future. But they didn't expect that Mo Jingli didn't even bother to inform them that he was going to attack. However, they had inadvertently saved the Yi family. Of course, the reason why the emperor did not punish the Yi family was probably because they were related to the Wang family. Yi Li sighed and looked at Minister Yi. Father, I'm afraid that the emperor already knows about fourth sister's pregnancy. He hasn't done anything to her yet. I'm afraid that he wants to use her child to threaten Prince Li. Minister Yi had already thought of this. He didn't really come to the Prince Ding mansion for Ying. Then Yi Li raised her hand to stop him from speaking. She looked at Minister Yi and said, Father, this official knows that I don't understand. But the most taboo thing for those in power is for the people below to be disloyal. Father, you can't really think that the emperor doesn't know anything, right? In Li Er's opinion, Prince Li is not the opponent of that person in the palace. Minister Ye's expression changed slightly. You mean? Yi Li lowered her head and drank tea. She didn't answer and let Minister Yi sit there with his expression changing. Old Madame Yi couldn't sit still and quickly asked, Li Er, what should we do now? Yi Li said faintly, Father, report Prince Li's crime as soon as possible and ask for forgiveness from the emperor. As for the future, the emperor will no longer trust the Yi family. So Father, it's best to ask the emperor to remove you from the position of minister. In the future it's better to keep a low profile and teach Brother Rong well. This. Minister Yi and old Madame Yi were stunned. There was an unwilling expression on their faces. After thinking for a while, old Madame Yi looked at Yi Li cautiously and said, Li Er, Prince Ding has just quelled the rebellion in Yongzhou. Should we ask him? Looking at old Madame Ye's hopeful expression, Yi Li sneered and said faintly, Prince Ding's residence has done a lot to quell the rebellion. Grandmother doesn't know. Don't tell me that father doesn't know the current situation of Prince Ding's residence? Minister Yi could only sigh dejectedly. It was because Prince Ding's residence had done a lot that it was impossible to plead for him. The more Prince Ding pleaded, the more the emperor would suppress the Yi family. Minister Yi didn't know whether he should be resentful or not. Because of Prince Ding's residence, the emperor will never use the Yi family again. But it was also because of Prince Ding's residence, because his daughter was Princess Ding, the Yi family was saved from the disaster. Father, if you can pick it up, then you can let it go. When it's time to fight, fight. When it's time to retreat, retreat. No matter how good the fame and fortune are, can it be better than your own name? Yi Li said softly. Minister Yi paused for a while and there was a struggle on his face. Looking at Yi Li, he said, if in the future... Yi Li interrupted him. Father, be careful with your words. Minister Yi finally lowered his head dejectedly. He sighed and didn't say anything else. Old Madame Yi also understood that Yi Li had personally rejected asking Prince Ding to plead for leniency. She had cut off the last hope of the Yi family. Thinking that she would no longer be the old Madame of Minister's residence and that the Yi family would decline, she couldn't help but feel resentment in her heart. Li Er, how can you be so cruel? No matter how wrong your father is, he is still your father. Our Yi family is still your maternal family. What good will it do you if the Yi family declines? Prince Ding's residence doesn't have any relatives. Don't you want people to help you in the court in the future? Help? Yi Li murmured softly. She looked up at old Madame Ye's pained expression. Father and grandmother, have you gone to see eldest sister and Prince Nan? Old Madame Yi was speechless. They had already gone to Prince Li's residence when he was in trouble. Unfortunately, Prince Nan's residence had closed its doors and refused visitors. They didn't even see Prince Nan and Prince Nan. Only a few days ago, Yi Zhen had quietly returned to Ye's residence once. The meaning behind her words was that Prince Nan's residence couldn't help. After all, as a subject, no one dared to provoke a rebellion. Last year, eldest uncle mentioned to me that father had been cautious all his life. These 2 years he was a bit arrogant. I also mentioned it to grandmother. Unfortunately, at that time grandmother and father only thought that I was resentful and jealous of second sister and fourth sister because I was married into the Prince Ding mansion. Now that things have come to this, not to mention that Prince Ding is unable to plead for father, even if he could, has father thought about how you will stand in the court in the future? On the way back I also heard that these days, the emperor dotes on imperial concubine Yun and Wang Zhaorong. He even faintly revealed that he wanted to make imperial concubine Lu's son the crown prince. It seems that he wants to use the Yun and Wang families' people. The Lu family is even more popular. Father, whether it is the Lu family or the Yun and Wang families, they are all prestigious families. And the most important thing is, they don't get along with the Yi family. Father still doesn't understand the emperor's meaning? Chapter 238. In an instant Minister Yi seemed to have aged 10 years. He said hoarsely, I know. I'll go back and ask the emperor for forgiveness. Seeing Minister Ye's aged appearance, Yili secretly shook her head. She was not moved. Some people were born to view fame and fortune as more important than their lives, but there was no other way. Prince is back. The atmosphere in the parlor was a bit gloomy. A maid's voice came from outside the door. Before she finished speaking, Emo Shuyao had already entered the hall. After returning to the capital, he was called into the palace by Emo Shuyao before he even had time to change his clothes. Emo Shuyao was still wearing a white robe. There was a trace of tiredness between his brows that was hard to detect. Greetings to Prince. Minister Yi and old Madame Yi hurriedly stood up and bowed. Emo Shuyao nodded slightly. He walked to Yi Li's side and sat down. Lord Yi, old Madame is here to see Li Li? Minister Yi nodded awkwardly and said, That's right. Li'er has been missing for several months. Mother and I are very worried. So when we heard that Prince brought Li'er back, we hurriedly came to see. Emo Shuyao nodded calmly. He naturally did not care about this excuse. If they were worried, they would have been worried long ago. Why would they wait until now to worry? In these 2 months, the Yi family did not even send anyone to the Prince Ding mansion to ask about her, let alone send people to look for her. Even the Marquis Nan's mansion sent people to ask twice. In the eyes of outsiders, the Yi family was not only cold but also heartless. Nurse Sun said that as soon as you came back, you were busy with the mansion's affairs. If you're tired, you should rest first. It won't be too late to talk about those trivial matters in a few days. Ignoring Minister Yi and old Madame Yi, Emo Shuyao turned to whisper to Yi Li. Yi Li smiled and shook her head. How could Minister Yi not see that Prince Ding did not want to see him? He was embarrassed to stay and could only stand up and leave. Looking at the cultured and elegant man sitting beside Yi Li, who could not conceal his awe-inspiring majesty, other than the silver mask that covered half of his face, where did he look sickly and disabled? If Prince Ding were to fully recover, the Ding royal residence's rise would be an ironclad matter. She only hated herself for having eyes but not being able to see. Back then, because the Ding palace was a taboo subject to the emperor and Prince Ding's health, she had neglected them. Now it was too late to regret. Why did His Majesty summon you to the palace in such a hurry? Yi Li asked after having people send Minister Yi and old Madame Yi out. Emo Shuyao rubbed the space between his eyebrows and frowned. The emperor plans to marry a princess to the northern tribes for peace. Political marriage? Yi Li couldn't help but think of the marriage with Xiling Princess Lingyun last year. She frowned in confusion and asked, Who does the emperor plan to send to the marriage? All of the previous emperor's princesses had already been married. Among Emo Jingqi's own daughters, the oldest seemed to be Princess Changle, who was 8 years old this year. Emo Shuyao calmly said, Naturally he will choose from the capital's nobility or the imperial family. The Duke of Hua's granddaughter is also on the list. Tianxiang? Yi Li frowned. The northern tribes was a bitter and cold place. Furthermore, everyone knew that the emperor chose this marriage to free up his hands to deal with the Prince of Li. Once the matter with the Prince of Li was over, who would remember that there was a woman in the distant northern tribes? If the two countries were to go to war, the princess in the marriage would only be a sacrifice. Emo Shuyao said, You don't need to be too worried. His Majesty has to give face to the Duke of Hua and the Empress. Furthermore, if he really wants to marry the northern tribes, he will most likely choose someone from the imperial family. After all, the people of the northern tribes are not so easily fooled. Yi Li nodded and asked curiously, Does the emperor need to specially summon you to the palace to discuss the marriage with the northern tribes? Emo Shuyao's lips curled into a mocking smile. When the princess is to be married, the emperor wishes for me to represent the Dechu state in sending the bride off. He also wishes for me to attend the king of the northern tribe's 60th birthday celebration in the 9th month. For the Prince of Dingwa to personally send the bride off, This type of marriage was somewhat unexpected. Yili furrowed her brows in thought. After a while she raised her head and asked, "The emperor wishes for you to be transferred away from the Dechu state." But the capital of the northern tribes was far in the north. If they wanted to make it in time for the king of the northern tribe's birthday celebration in the 9th month, the wedding procession would have to leave in the middle of the 7th month. Even if they rushed back after the wedding, Emo Shuyao would be back in the 10th month at the very least. In other words, Emo Shuyao would not be in the Dechu state for nearly 3 months. No one could imagine how many things could happen in 3 months. Emo Shuyao shook his head. The emperor has made many preparations these years. It is hard to guess what he wants to do in such a short period of time. It was not hard to guess the thoughts of a smart person. It was also not hard to guess the thoughts of an idiot. However, it was hard to guess the thoughts of those who were bold and imaginative. For example, Emo Jingli. Even someone as smart as Emo Shuyao and Su Qingchen would never have thought that he would start a rebellion at that time. Because anyone could tell at a glance that it was impossible for him to succeed. In reality, even if Emo Jingli really joined forces with the southern border to break through Shattered Snow Pass, Emo Jingli would not gain much of an advantage. It would only make the people at the border suffer. As the emperor, how much did Emo Jingchi care about the suffering of the people? Then you agree? Yili asked. Emo Shuyao raised his brows and smiled calmly. The emperor's orders cannot be disobeyed. Yili shrugged helplessly. I understand. I will stay in the capital. Emo Shuyao shook his head and smiled. No, you will go to Yunzhou when the time comes. Yili raised her brows and looked at him in confusion. Emo Shuyao smiled. Prince Ding is not the emperor. The Ding King Manor is not the imperial palace. There is no need for someone to guard it. Emo Jingqi. Sometimes when he is forced into a corner he likes to use tricks that harm others without benefiting himself. I will be more assured if you go to Yunzhou. The true core of the Ding King Manor was not in the capital but the people in the manor. Even if the Ding King Manor was razed to the ground, as long as the owner was still alive, the Ding King Manor would still be the Ding King Manor. Yili shook her head. That is even more impossible. If I go to Yunzhou, won't I put grandfather and the rest in danger? Don't tell me that Emo Jingqi won't act against Yunzhou. Since they dared to act against the Prince Ding Mansion, why would they be afraid of the Su family? Besides, the Prince Ding Mansion's opponent is not just the one in the imperial palace. Emo Shuyao looked at Yili quietly. After a long time he sighed. Lili, I can't seem to let you live a peaceful life. Yili chuckled softly. Of course I can live a peaceful life. You can find a place where no one knows and hide me. But I don't like that. Do you understand? Just like this trip to Nanjiang. I don't have to go. I can send someone. Even if no one goes, Big Brother will be fine. Even if I can't appear in front of people for the time being, I can find a place to live in seclusion for a while. It's because I want to go out for a walk that I want to go. Also, I feel that I like the days outside more. Even if there was danger outside, at least she had a clear goal and could distinguish between friend and foe. Once she returned to the capital, Yili felt a headache when she thought of facing those people who laughed and spoke warmly to each other but stabbed her in the back. It wasn't that she didn't know how to, but she didn't like it. I also feel that when Li is outside she is even more stunning. Emo Shuyao laughed softly. In the capital, Lili always had a faint smile on her face. She was gentle and elegant as if she was a qualified princess consort from a scholarly family. Emo Shuyao would never tell anyone that when he shot that arrow outside Yonglin City, he saw the woman in front of him wearing the same black clothes as the Black Cloud Cavalry. When she looked back, she had a cold and proud aura and a dazzling starlight in her eyes. There had never been a moment when he clearly understood that his princess consort was not only a graceful woman who held a scroll under the lamp, but also an outstanding figure who could move unhindered on the battlefield. Emo Shuyao suddenly thought of the oath he had made many years ago in front of his father and elder brother. I, Emo Shuyao's wife, will be like my ancestor Princess Qing Yun, and follow me to conquer the world. Hand in hand we will see the rivers and mountains together. That arrow, Emo Shuyao felt that perhaps what he shot out was not only the arrow that saved Li but also his heart. Chapter 239. Yi Li's jade face blushed slightly. Ever since they reunited in Yonglin City, she and Emo Shuyao were always a bit strange when they interacted. Usually she didn't think too much about it when there was something to do, but when it was quiet, it always made her feel uncomfortable. She wasn't some wooden block that didn't understand romance. Ever since that kiss outside Shattering Snow Pass, she naturally understood that the two of them were no longer close friends like before. But when facing Emo Shuyao, she couldn't bring out the freedom and casualness that she had when she was in love in her previous life. This kind of uncontrollable emotion made her feel some annoyance towards Emo Shuyao. Emo Shuyao seemed to understand her feelings and didn't provoke her too much. But when the two of them interacted in private, they were more intimate and gentle than before. How are Qingwan and Qingyu? Can you let them out? Yili tilted her head and asked in a low voice. Emo Shuyao smiled faintly. It's nothing. Not letting them out is for their safety. Now that you've safely returned, it's naturally fine. I'll let them out later. Returning to her own courtyard, Qingwan and Qingyu's complexions were really good. It seemed that no one had made things difficult for them in these 2 months. Qingxia and Qingxuang were also busy surrounding Yili, giving her tonics and new clothes as if she had suffered greatly outside. Yili was helpless and could only let the servant girls busy themselves. When they calmed down a little, she sent Qingxia and Qingxuang away, leaving only Qingyu and Qingwan in front of her. Newbie has been negligent. Wang Fei, please punish. The room quieted down and Qingyu and Qingwan both knelt down. Rise. Yili frowned and looked at the two, asking, have you been well these 2 months? Qingyu and Qingwan couldn't help but wipe their tears. Qingwan nodded repeatedly and said, we are fine, but we are very worried about the princess. If anything happens to the princess, we won't have the face to see the old master and the eldest master even if we die 10,000 times. Seeing the obvious joy and relief on their faces, Yili also understood that these two girls had been worried for the past 2 months. She sighed softly and said, what are you hiding? I understand Prince's temperament. You're my people. If you didn't hide something from me, he wouldn't have put you under house arrest for the past 2 months. Is it inconvenient to tell Prince, or is it something you can't even tell me? The two of them couldn't help but glance at each other. They looked at Yili with hesitation in their eyes. Yili didn't rush them. She just looked at them indifferently. After a long while, Qingyu looked at Yili and finally made up her mind. She said, we servants have indeed failed in our duties. Actually, this servant had already left Yaohua Palace before the fire. After that, Qingwan also left in order to save this servant. So after the fire in Yaohua Palace, the shadow guard couldn't find us. Yili nodded. Then, where did you go? This servant saw a person, so I followed. Qingyu whispered. This servant heard Qingyu scream and followed. Qingwan continued. Yili frowned. Who did you see? Qingyu whispered. Suzuki and Prince. Suzuki and Prince? Yili blinked in surprise. You mean you saw Suzuki and Prince together in the palace, so you followed them? Are you sure you saw Suzuki? Qingyu lowered her head and thought for a while. This servant has seen the painting of Chujing country sent by others at the wedding of Prince and Princess. It is at least 70 to 80% similar to the woman in the painting. There are not many people who look so beautiful even in the palace. And Your Highness, that is why this servant. Yili nodded slightly. She understood why these two girls had been unwilling to tell the truth to Emo Shuyao. So, you saw Prince meeting a woman who looked very similar to Suzuki in the palace. And it happened that Yaohua Palace was on fire and I was missing, so you deliberately concealed it and refused to tell him the truth. Qingyu bit her lip and nodded. Yili thought for a while and asked, have you ever thought, if Prince's legs were inconvenient at that time, wouldn't it be too eye-catching to meet a woman in the palace? With Prince's martial arts, he shouldn't let you get too close. If you didn't get close, how can you be sure that the person you saw was Suzuki and Prince? Qingyu said, this servant is not sure whether that woman is Suzuki or not. But the man's voice is definitely Prince's. Yili frowned. She knew about Qingyu's hearing. Qingyu's hearing was very good since she was a child, even better than Qingwan, who practiced martial arts since childhood. As long as she heard the voice once, she would never forget it, not to mention that she saw Emo Shuyao every day. Then what about Qingwan? This servant heard Qingyu's scream. Although Qingyu knows how to use poison, she doesn't know martial arts, so this servant immediately rushed over. But as soon as she saw Qingyu's back, she fainted. Qingyu frowned and said, this servant heard that Prince was indeed shocked and then knocked out. But it was just a very low voice. It was impossible to alarm Qingwan. Yili smiled and said, You guys have worked hard these past 2 months. Tell me, what do you think? The two couldn't help but look at each other. Qing Wan carefully glanced at Yili before saying, This servant didn't think anything. Qing Yu said, This servant suspected Prince and someone, then heard that Princess was missing, so, Yili smiled and said, So you suspect that Prince and others conspired to kill me? Qing Yu's face turned red. Qing Wan stared at Qing Yu with her eyes wide open, looking frightened. Yili understood that what they said should be true. After all, Qing Wan and Qing Yu lived separately in these 2 months. There was no chance to see each other at all. The secret guards had also found them from different places. Unless they had made a confession before the secret guards found them, there was nothing they could say about the two of them. These 2 months, Qing Wan was very quiet. It was just that in the beginning she cried every day. On the contrary, Qing Yu, who had always been quiet, always tried to escape and was always hostile to the people in the Wangfu. If it was because Qing Yu saw Mo Xiuyao and Qing Wan didn't see him, it would make sense. After thinking for a while, Yili nodded and said, I understand. Qing Yu, don't mention this matter again in the future. I believe in Prince, understand? Qing Yu frowned slightly and wanted to say something. Yili said faintly, Sometimes what you hear with your ears may not be the truth. Have you ever thought that if it was really Prince, with Prince's meticulous mind, would he appear in the palace on the day he knew that I entered the palace? In addition, the biggest flaw is that all of you are still alive. You were knocked unconscious because you found out about Prince. Then, forget about Qing Wan, why are you still safe and sound until now? This is the Ding Palace. If His Highness wants to silence people, not to mention all of you, even I, the princess consort, would not be able to escape. Do you understand? Qing Yu's face turned pale. Princess consort's meaning is. Qing Wan was puzzled and said, If the other party wants to sow discord, does he know that the princess is fine in the fire? Chapter 240. Yili nodded and said with a smile, It's very likely. However, if something really happens to me and the prince knows that you are indeed innocent, he will naturally let you go. What will Qing Yu do after going out? Qing Yu said firmly, Naturally, I will report this matter to the old master and the eldest young master, and seek justice for Miss. Qing Wan exclaimed, The other party wants to sow discord between the Ding King's mansion and the Su family? Yili held her forehead and said, Whether he wants to sow discord between me and the prince, or sow discord between the Prince Ding mansion and the Su family, it depends on whether he knows about the fire in Yaohua Palace. In fact, it's the same. If my relationship with the prince is broken, how can the relationship between the Prince Ding mansion and the Su family be good? Qing Yu said with a pale face, I suspect that the prince did something wrong? But what she couldn't figure out was who that person was. She was definitely more confident in her ears than her eyes. It doesn't matter. Fortunately, the prince also suspected that you knew something dangerous, so he put you under house arrest. Now there are no bad consequences. As for the prince you mentioned, I will check what's going on later. Yili said with a smile, and a cold light flashed in her eyes. Sure enough, as soon as she returned to the capital, there were endless troubles. Then let her see if there was a second Su Zuidi and Mo Xiuyao in the capital. Qing Yu nodded seriously and said, This servant also wants to know who can deceive this servant's ears. Yili smiled faintly. Seeing with one's own eyes could deceive people, let alone hearing with one's ears. However, she also wanted to know who could know her and the people around her so well. Yili told Mo Xiuyao about Qing Yu and Qing Wan, and Mo Xiuyao turned around and ordered people to investigate. No matter who the person impersonating Mo Xiuyao was, that woman was definitely not Su Zuidi. There was someone who wanted to use this matter to sow discord between the two of them and even the relationship between the Prince Ding mansion and the Su family. It could be seen that this person absolutely understood the Prince Ding mansion and Mo Xiuyao himself. As for being impersonated, Mo Xiuyao wasn't worried at all. This was because the subordinates in King Ding's residence had always accepted orders and not people. Although the prince and princess consort were not an exception, but everyone knew that Prince Ding would never casually give orders to the people below him. Moreover, if those shadow guards couldn't even recognize the real prince, they wouldn't be able to survive. On the second day after returning to Beijing, Yili personally went to the Su family to visit her uncle and aunt. Although ordinary people didn't know about what happened in Yonglin City, It definitely couldn't be hidden from the influential officials in the palace who had various channels of information. Moreover, Mo Xiuyao had recovered and naturally had to take on the responsibility of being the prince of Ding country, so Yili, Princess Ding, naturally didn't need to deliberately keep a low profile. As soon as she stepped into the Su family's residence, Su Qingyan came out like a gust of wind, pulling Yili and chattering non-stop. Seeing this, the veins on Su Hongyan's forehead were throbbing. Qingyan. Su Qingyan's face stiffened and he winked at Yili for help before turning back to smile at Su Hongyan. Second uncle, aren't we happy to see Sister Li come back? Su Qingzi looked at him indifferently and didn't say anything. Su Qingbai glanced at him unhappily and said, we are all very happy that Li is back. Look at you. Fortunately we're not in Yunzhou. If grandfather and father saw you they would definitely punish you. Su Qingyan shrunk his neck and made a face at his fourth brother. Yili felt warmth in her heart when she saw her relatives. She smiled and said, second uncle, second brother, fourth brother, don't blame fifth brother. Li is also very happy to see you after not seeing you for a long time. Su Hongyan looked at Yili and nodded with satisfaction. It seems that you didn't suffer outside these days. Your complexion is much better than when you were in Beijing. Madame Su had already come forward and pulled Yili to ask about her well-being. She felt sorry for her for going out alone and felt that she had lost a lot of weight and needed to be nourished. Knowing that they had serious matters to discuss, Madame Su pulled Yili aside and said a few words. Then she turned around and ordered the kitchen to prepare lunch, leaving her husband and sons alone. After entering the study and sitting down, before she could say anything, Su Qingyan couldn't stop fidgeting. He looked at Yili and said, Sister Li, you really went to guard Yonglin? Yili raised her eyebrows in surprise and said, even you know about it? It seems that news spread quickly in the border city. Su Qingyan waved his hand and said, Sister Li, you don't know. Some news is indeed a secret outside, but once it reaches the capital, it's no longer a secret. There are many people who know about this. A few days ago someone asked me about you in a roundabout way. Humph. Are you bullying me because I'm young and easy to fool? Su Qingzi nodded and looked at Yili. Little Wu is right. There aren't many sources of information that can reach Shattered Snow Pass. But in this capital there aren't many secrets that can be hidden. Yili waved her hand and said, that's fine. I've already discussed this with the prince. Originally, it wasn't a secret that Princess Ding could mobilize the Black Cloud Cavalry. After all, I went to Yonglin on the battlefield. There are many things that can't be hidden even if I want to. It doesn't matter if people know about it. Su Hongyan frowned and said, Prince means. Looking at the beautiful niece in front of him who looked similar to his little sister, Su Hongyan wasn't sure if it was what he thought. After all, although the Ding prince didn't like women, he was very respectful to the princess regardless of her background. But the princess who truly controlled the military power of the Prince Ding mansion was only Princess Qing Yun 100 years ago. If Prince Ding and Li. Although he was happy that Prince Ding valued and trusted his niece, Su Hongyan was worried about this. Once she controlled the military power of the Ding mansion, Li would no longer be as simple as a princess. When the time came, the problems that she would face wouldn't be something that her uncle could help her with. Yili looked at Su Hongyan and said seriously, Li understands uncle's worries, but since the day of the wedding, Li has been tied to the Prince Ding mansion. If some things can't be avoided, then there is no harm in facing them head-on. It's better to have two people than one. Su Hongyan couldn't help but sigh. Although he didn't ask about the emperor's actions in court these days, it wasn't that he didn't understand. Ever since Prince Li raised his troops, the emperor had supported the Lu, Wang and Yun families. It could even be said that he didn't hide the fact that he used the eradication of Prince Li's faction to suppress the former officials of the Prince Ding mansion. These years the emperor had placed many people in court. Now the Wang and Yun families had suddenly replaced the original Yi family and even had the tendency to surpass the Hua family. What was worse was that for some reason the Lu, Wang and Yun families had secretly formed a group. Originally, the separation of the three powers wasn't very obvious, but now in the blink of an eye, the emperor's people had taken the lead. Su Qingyan wouldn't believe that the emperor's actions were to deal with Prince Li. Su Hongyan naturally understood that the emperor didn't put his younger brother in his eyes. His true goal was always the Prince Ding mansion. Chapter 241. Su Qingzi's voice was cold as usual. but there was a faint warmth in his eyes as he looked at Yili. If Li Er has the ability, then there's no harm in accepting it. Su Hongyan nodded helplessly and looked at Yili lovingly. Your first uncle mentioned it in his letter a few days ago. Since you were able to bring people to Yongzhou, he probably guessed Prince Ding's intentions. But you have to be careful in the future. Other than your third brother, everyone in our family is a scholar, so I'm afraid they won't be of much help. Su Hongyan wasn't a military officer, but that didn't mean he didn't understand military officers. Military officers were different from civil officials, especially famous generals on the battlefield. They didn't care about your identity or status. If you couldn't convince the public, even if you were the emperor's daughter, they wouldn't listen to you. Yili nodded and smiled. Second uncle, don't worry. This time in Yongzhou, Prince Ding gave me a pretty good lieutenant under General Murong's command, as well as the Black Cloud Cavalry's commander who was guarding Yonglin. We can all be considered acquaintances, so there's no need to worry too much. As for the other matters, we can talk about it later. Su Hongyan's brows relaxed as he nodded. Prince Ding is still the most considerate. Su Qingyan smiled. If he knew Li Er could lead the Mahist army, why would third brother run to the barracks himself? Wouldn't it be fine if he just followed Li Er? Su Hongyan glared at him. Nonsense, if Qingfeng didn't have a future in the barracks, wouldn't he be a burden to Li Er? If he had a future, why wouldn't it be the same? Su Qingyan blinked. I just feel that with third brother here, Li Er would be more at ease. Yili smiled. It's too early to say this. I don't have time to manage the Mahist army right now. Moreover, with third brother's personality, if he knew that it was because of me that he entered the Mahist army, I'm afraid he would run far away and insist on making a name for himself. Thinking of his son's temperament, Su Hongyan couldn't help but smile, but he seemed to be very satisfied. He said earnestly to Yili, although Prince trusts you, you have to remember that there are many things that you have to distinguish between public and private matters. Whether it was the royal family or anything else, the biggest taboo was having too many relatives. Does Li Er understand? Yili's heart warmed as she nodded and said, Li Er understands. Many thanks for uncle's teachings. Seeing that Yili had listened to his words, Su Hongyan nodded with relief and sighed softly. Li Er was really different from his smart but weak little sister. Although Li Er's surname was not Su, he still had a kind of pride and gratification of having a daughter in his family. She believed that her father would be extremely happy to see such a Li Er. Yili then recounted her trip to Nanzhou and Su Qingchen in detail. Su Hongyan frowned in disapproval and said, putting yourself in danger. Qingchen is taking too much of a risk. Su Qingbai wasn't worried about his big brother's safety at all. He smiled and said, second uncle, don't worry. When has big brother ever done something he wasn't confident in? Didn't Li Er also say that even if she didn't go to Nanjiang, big brother would still be able to escape? Su Qingyan nodded and said, fourth brother is right. Sister Li, is that Saintess of Nanjiang very beautiful? Why did she capture big brother but not harm him? She didn't even force a confession out of him. Could it be that she has taken a fancy to big brother? It had to be said that to a certain extent Su Qingyan was speaking the truth. Yili blinked and shook her head with some regret. I haven't seen the Saintess of Nanjiang, but she shouldn't be bad. Su Qingbai raised his brows and said, I feel that Princess Anqi is interested in big brother. Second brother, tell me. Su Qingzi put down his teacup and said indifferently, neither is possible. Big brother only sees Princess Anqi as a friend. Su Qingyan hid behind Su Qingbai and bared his teeth at his second brother. He muttered in a low voice, you're so unromantic. I really don't know how Sister Qing can stand you. Su Qingbai looked curiously at Yili and asked, Li Er lied to Princess Anqi that you're big brother's fiancé. What did big brother say? Hearing this, Su Qingyan's eyes lit up and he stared at Yili. Yili gritted her teeth in annoyance. She should have known that she had been deceived by big brother. He didn't even write a letter to tell uncle and the others about it. In the end, she was the one who exposed the truth. She carefully glanced at her second uncle and said in a low voice, big brother didn't say anything. And he even used me as a shield. Su Hongyan shook his head helplessly and said, your status is different. Although it's important to investigate your big brother's whereabouts, you have to be careful about your reputation. Li Er understands. Su Hongyan didn't reprimand her. Yili sighed in relief and laughed crisply. Right, I haven't congratulated second brother, fourth brother, and fifth brother for passing the imperial examinations. Su Hongyan shook his head and glared at Su Qingyan in annoyance. Although things hadn't been going well since the beginning of spring, the triennial imperial examinations were still held as usual. Originally it wasn't a big deal. After all, no one thought that the sons of the Su family would fail. However, the fact that the three sons of the Su family had passed the imperial examinations at the same time inevitably raised eyebrows. Su Qingyan pursed his lips in grievance and said, "I was just casually writing. Who knew that the questions this year would be so simple?" Under the gaze of everyone in the room, Su Qingyan finally couldn't argue anymore and could only lower his head guiltily. How could he say that he had given it his all because some son of a noble family had mocked him a few times? Yili smiled and said, "So this time, second brother came in third, fifth brother came in fourth, and fourth brother came in 19th? Su Qingyan stole a glance at Su Qingbai and lowered his head even more guiltily. Of course, he knew that fourth brother's talent was definitely above his own. Second brother could definitely leave the top and second place far behind. However, they had purposely held back their true abilities. He had indeed done his best, but he had only gotten fourth place. Seeing Su Qingyan's guilty appearance, Yili advised, "Second uncle, this is nothing. Fifth brother really failed. I'm afraid that people would be suspicious." Su Hongyan frowned and said, "He shouldn't have participated in the imperial examinations this year." Speaking of this, Su Hongyan also felt helpless. Qingyan was only 14 years old and Qingbai was only 16 or 17. As a man, even if he was a member of the Su family, who didn't want to be famous and have a good achievement? The children of the Su family, whether it was the steady Su Qingze or the lively Su Qingyan, if they weren't part of the Su family, they would definitely be the top scorers of the imperial examinations. Their future prospects would naturally be limitless. However, as part of the Su family, they could only have empty ambitions. They could enjoy the false reputation of the Su family, but they couldn't do anything. It was all because of the Su family's reputation. Su Hongyan would always remember the heavy and apologetic expression his father had when he left the capital with his eldest brother. He used to have the heart to help the world, but unfortunately the royal family didn't need his ambition. The royal family only needed him to stay in the seemingly noble position of imperial censor, which actually had no real power, to show the world the royal family's benevolence. Since second brother, fourth brother and fifth brother are all on the imperial examinations, will they stay in the capital? Yili asked. Su Qingze and Su Qingbai were fine. Su Qingze was already 20 years old and his temperament was even more steady. Although Su Qingbai was still young, he was indeed the most experienced and skilled in the Su family. Not only was Su Qingyan young, but his temperament was also like a child who hadn't grown up. Su Hongyan shook his head and said, "Your second brother and fourth brother will stay. I've already sent a memorial to the emperor. Qingyan is still young and his father is old. He needs to return to Yunzhou to serve his father." Chapter 242. Will the emperor agree? In Emo Jingqi's eyes, keeping Su Qingyan was far more useful than keeping Su Qingbai. Su Hongyan smiled calmly. Shao Wu is the youngest in the Su family. Of all virtues, filial piety is the most important. The emperor has no choice but to agree. Since second uncle was so confident, Yili did not ask any more questions. She changed her mind to care about Su Qingze and Su Qingbai's positions. Su Qingze, as the Tanhua, was sent to Hanlin Academy to be an editor. Su Qingbai, as a scholar, was sent to the Ministry of Rites as a substitute. They were all idle positions without any real power. Compared to the top scholars, their ranks were the highest, but at the same time they had the least power. Especially Su Qingbai. His salary as the minister-counselor of the Ministry of Rites was indeed an empty title. Who knew when he would be able to make up for it? Most importantly, Su Qingze and Su Qingbai's personalities were not suitable for their positions. It would be better if they were swapped. Second brother must stay in the capital. If fourth brother can, it's best if he's sent out. Su Qingbai looked young and gentle, but his thoughts were deep. He was a classic example of pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. If it were not for the Su family, even if he was born in an ordinary family, he would most likely become an important official before the age of 36. Actually, Su Qingbai was the most suitable person in the Su family to be an official. Su Hongyan shook his head. How could the emperor be at ease to send him out? Yili frowned. Not necessarily. Fourth brother is still young. Perhaps the emperor will be more at ease. But I'm afraid it'll be hard on fourth brother. Su Qingbai smiled lightly. The places the emperor is willing to send me to are those barren hills and unruly rivers. But it's better than staying in the capital doing nothing and being controlled by others. Su Hongyan looked at Su Qingbai. He understood that he was moved by Yi Li's suggestion. That's right. If he had a choice, he would rather be sent out. Even if he was a county official, it was better than staying in the capital and listening to those civil officials talk. After thinking for a moment, Su Hongyan nodded and said, "That's fine. Right now the emperor is busy. He should agree to this concession." Su Qingbai nodded and said with a faint smile, "Many thanks, second uncle." Su Hongyan waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need to say more. Yi Li accompanied her uncle and aunt to have lunch and prepared to return to the Fu. Before leaving, Su Hongyan instructed in a deep voice, "Li in the future, you must be careful of the people in the palace." Yi Li was stunned. She looked at her uncle in surprise. Su Hongyan just waved his hand and didn't say anything more. Yi Li had no choice but to bid farewell to her uncle and aunt before turning around to return home. When he returned to his residence, there were already 2 thick piles of invitation cards and banquet invitations from the various residences in the capital. Yi Li flipped through the photos and picked out a few important ones to reply to. She felt a headache coming on as she realized that she might need one or more all-around assistants. Qing Xia and Qing Shuang didn't know much to begin with. Although Qing Wan and Qing Yu each had their own strengths, they had nothing to do with this. Han Mingxi was a good candidate, but he was too eye-catching. After going through the people around her that she could use, she finally called over an heir and an San and threw them a pile of documents to be dealt with. And San had a bitter face as he realized that they originally didn't need to do anything and only needed to secretly follow their master's shadow guard. Then they became the personal bodyguards of the young masters, the all-around bodyguards of the eldest young miss, and the all-around bodyguards of the Princess Ding. Then they became the accountants of the Ding Palace as well as various stewards. The power was so big that San couldn't help but tremble. He wanted to cry but had no tears. "Princess consort, I don't understand this. Go and learn." Yi Li's pen was like the wind as she read through the documents in her hands. She didn't even raise her head as she said. And San had a bitter face. "Princess consort, we are the shadow guard." Yi Li faintly raised her head and glanced at him, saying, "I don't need a shadow guard. In the future Qin Feng will follow me. He is the commander of the Black Cloud Cavalry." And San unwillingly muttered, "Even if Princess Consort needed someone to help settle accounts, she should find Chief Steward Mo and Nurse Sunday, otherwise, she should let Qin Feng settle accounts. Why did she let him do such a sissy thing and then let Qin Feng take his position?" Yi Li nodded with satisfaction, saying, "It's really because he is the commander of the Black Cloud Cavalry. When he helps me, he can also be a bodyguard. You guys can also be my assistant." Assistant? And San had a blank face and an heir had a stupefied expression. What was an assistant? It didn't sound like a shadow guard at all. Yi Li smiled wholeheartedly as she looked at the 2 subordinates that she used very easily. "It's the people who will help me deal with everything." "Everything?" "That's right. Everything that I need you to help me deal with." An heir and Insan were smart enough, loyal enough, and skilled enough. An heir was steady and Insan was nimble. After following her for so long, they didn't have the restraint of others. They were simply born to be assistants. Thinking that she could free herself from the heavy chores to do other things that she didn't have time for, Yi Li was in a good mood. "Go find Uncle Mo first. Learn what you need to learn in half a month. Otherwise, the next 3 months the Black Cloud Peak will be your home." I just happened to think of a lot of new things recently. Seeing their master's gentle smile and thinking of the month of struggle in the forest last year, the 2 trembled at the same time. They cleanly turned and left. Hearing the 2 subordinates run away, Yi Li couldn't help but shake her head with a chuckle. Princess Consort Yun Ting Gongzi and Qin Feng Gongzi are asking for an audience. Qing Wan came in to report. "Let them in." Yun Ting's home was near the capital. After leaving Yongzhou, he parted ways with them. They went east to Guangling and Yun Ting went north to return home. At this time he went to the Prince Ding mansion with Qin Feng, which made Yi Li a little surprised. After a while the 2 entered the study side by side. Subordinate Yun Ting Qin Feng greets Princess Consort. Yili said with a smile, no need. Yun Ting, has your home been settled? Yun Ting said with a hearty smile, many thanks for Princess Consort's concern. Everything is good at home. Yili nodded with satisfaction and looked at Qin Feng. Qin Feng respectfully reported, subordinate has prepared the things that Princess Consort ordered. I'm just waiting for Princess Consort to personally inspect. Yili looked at the few remaining account books on the table and nodded, it's still early. Let's go now. Yun Ting, someone will send you to the barracks later. Also, Prince Ding has recommended several military books. Finish them all in 3 months. After 3 months, as long as you pass the test, you can officially become a member of the Mahist army. Understand? Yun Ting's eyes lit up. He said in a clear voice, Yun Ting understands. I promise I'll finish them all in 3 months. Yili smiled faintly and nodded with satisfaction. Yun Ting was filled with joy. Because of the ecstasy of being able to enter the Mahist army, he forgot to ask how many books there were, and what he was going to do in the barracks in the next 3 months. Because of this, he was not like this for the next 3 months. After changing into men's clothing, Yili took Qin Feng out of the Fu with slight anticipation. During this time they encountered Ensan, who had just received a large pile of overdue account books from Chief Steward Mo and was currently looking at Qin Feng with a resentful gaze. This caused the leader of the Shadow Guard, who was not used to following Yili, to feel an inexplicable chill down his spine. The two left Jing City. Qin Feng looked at the youth in front of him who, other than his lack of height, was still handsome and elegant. He couldn't help but be filled with admiration. He finally understood why when Princess Consort left Jing City, no one could find her. Even the Shadow Guard of the Ding King's Fu could not find any trace of Princess Consort. This kind of disguise was much better than the so-called disguise techniques of the Jianghu. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, even if Princess Consort was standing in front of him, he would have thought that she was a slightly familiar person and let her pass. Chapter 243. Raising her head, she saw Qin Feng's strange gaze. Yili smiled and said, don't be so shocked, it's just a little disguise. Qin Feng shook his head and said, Wang Fei's disguise isn't something that just anyone knows. The so-called disguise wasn't just changing one's appearance. True tracking experts might not look at the face or the clothing on a person's body. Rather, it was easy to find clues from a person's habitual movements, figure, back, etc. But just now, when he had followed behind Wang Fei, he didn't find any similarities between Wang Fei's movements when she was dressed as a man and when she was dressed as a woman. Even when Wang Fei was dressed as a man, her walking posture, her expression, and her eyes didn't look like a woman's at all. She looked just like a handsome young master of 14 or 15 years old. Qin Feng didn't know why Wang Fei, as a daughter of a noble family, would know these things, but since the prince trusted Wang Fei and they had personally seen Wang Fei's abilities in Yonglin City, then he naturally would follow Wang Fei's orders. Qin Feng followed Yili on a fast horse to the foot of Black Cloud Peak. Last time he had come to this place with the prince. But in a year it had changed a bit. 2 villages stood at the foot of the mountain that was originally somewhat remote and barren. A small village was built on the foundation of the original mountain village on the mountainside. The people at the foot of the mountain were busy working in the fields. It looked no different from the normal villages outside Jing. The two dismounted and went up the mountain. They circled around the village at the foot of the mountain and came to the edge of the cliff at the back of the mountain. Qin Feng looked down. It wasn't very deep. Wang Fei, are we going down? Yili looked at him with a smile and said, I heard that your Black Cloud Cavalry's martial arts aren't bad. If you aren't afraid of death, jump down and see. Qin Feng looked suspiciously at the bottom of the cliff and frowned. With his martial arts, even if it wasn't easy to go down, it wouldn't be life-threatening unless there were some traps below. With Yili's warning, Qin Feng did not rashly use his qinggong to jump down. Instead, he used something like the wall climbing technique to slowly slide down the cliff. Fortunately, he had a dagger with him. Even if he stuck it into a crack in the rock, he wouldn't have slipped down. With great difficulty, he finally found a protruding spot. Before he could step on it, he discovered that the protruding spot had an arrow tip that was shining with a cold light. Qin Feng had no doubt that he would be turned into a hornet's nest if he were to lightly touch it. Helplessly, he held his dagger and carefully avoided the dangers one by one as he slid down the cliff. Below his feet was a clear lake. There were even green lotus leaves and a few flower buds floating on the surface of the water. However, the various cold glints on the surface of the water were definitely there to mock him. Qin Feng took a deep breath and used his qin gong to cross the lake, not daring to let his feet touch the surface of the water. 3 steps to the left. Yi Li's voice sounded from nearby. Qin Feng, who was about to land, hurriedly took 3 steps to the left before landing on the ground. He tilted his head to look at Wang Fei, who had clearly been waiting for him for a long time. Yi Li looked sardonically at him. She picked up a pebble from the ground and threw it at the spot he had just landed on. Whoosh whoosh. After a fierce rain of arrows came from all directions, Qin Feng looked speechlessly at the place he had just landed on that was filled with arrows. He couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Wang Fei. Qin Feng looked at the smiling and gentle woman in front of him and felt his scalp tingle. He stood where he was and didn't dare to move a step. He didn't want to use his body to test whether or not every inch of the surrounding area was filled with traps. He looked at the clear and quiet lake that did not seem to be dangerous at all. He swore that the sight of the lake filled with arrows was not his imagination. If someone really did not know what was good for them and jumped down using their qin gong, that person would probably become an enormous hedgehog. Yi Li said with a smile, "Don't be nervous. It's just a joke. This place is not like this normally." Qin Feng was silent. He believed that it would be more dangerous normally. Yi Li turned and pointed at the endless forest behind her. She asked with a smile, "Have you been here before?" Qin Feng looked and hesitated before shaking his head. He said, "It is not convenient to train soldiers near Jing. The Black Cloud Cavalry usually train at a place a few hundred li away from Jing. Also, the Black Cloud Cavalry were cavalry. Even if they trained, they would usually train in the wilderness or desert. In the forest, cavalry could not be used at all." Yi Li said with a smile, "When will the person I want arrive?" Qin Feng hesitated. "They should arrive in 2 hours." Qin Feng really did not have much confidence when he said this. Wang Fei had only given him a bunch of maps that could not be any simpler. Also, each map was not the same. Even though the Black Cloud Cavalry were skilled in tracking, he still had to look at the map for a long time before he was able to determine the approximate location. He did not know if the Black Cloud Cavalry would be able to find the place. As for what Wang Fei said about being disqualified if they were discovered by the commoners, Qin Feng did not even think about it. Even if the soldiers of the Black Cloud Cavalry were new recruits, if they did not want to, they would not be discovered by a group of commoners. How many can they arrive? The Black Cloud Cavalry and the Mahist army near Jing each chose 50 elite soldiers. Even if they cannot all arrive, at least 70 or 80 should not be a problem. Qin Feng thought for a moment and said, "Wang Fei." Qin Feng hesitated but still felt that he should clarify the question that had puzzled him for many days. He was the commander of the Black Cloud Cavalry. Even though he was not the highest commander and only had 2,000 people under him, he still felt that he should be responsible for the elite soldiers of the Black Cloud Cavalry. If Wang Fei felt that the Shadow Guard was not satisfied, then she should have the Shadow Guard commander train more and choose better ones. Even though transferring 50 elite soldiers would not affect the strength of the Black Cloud Cavalry, what was the use of these soldiers? If they were to be used as Shadow Guard, 70 or 80 people was clearly too many. Also, the Prince Ding mansion had Shadow Guards to begin with. If communication was not good, it could easily cause conflict between the Shadow Guard and the Black Cloud Cavalry. If they were to be used on the battlefield, 70 or 80 people, no matter how elite, would not be of much use. After all, using one person's strength to fight against an army of thousands was the same as throwing their lives away. "You are thinking too much." Seeing Qin Feng's hesitation and conflict, Yi Li said with a helpless smile, "Don't worry about this. I also transferred 30 people from the Shadow Guard. Let's see who gets here first. Do you want to make a bet?" Qin Feng thought about how he had heard San mention Wang Fei's gambling skills in Yonglin. He thought for a moment and said firmly, "Black Cloud Cavalry." Without a doubt, of the 3 groups, the Black Cloud Cavalry's combat strength and mobility far surpassed the others. Maybe their martial arts were not as good as some people in the Shadow Guard, but their courage had to be known. Other than the Shadow Guard specially trained for the Prince and Wang Fei, not all the other Shadow Guard were strong in martial arts. As for the Black Cloud Cavalry, every single one of them had undergone strict training and were already used to fighting as one. Yi Li raised an eyebrow and said disapprovingly, I feel that the Shadow Guard will arrive first, followed by the Black Cloud Cavalry, but the Mahist army will have the most people. Chapter 244. That is not possible. Qin Feng decisively rejected it. He did not have any intentions of looking down on the Mahist army, but he could not deny that the Black Cloud Cavalry was stronger than the Mahist army. In a 50 versus 50 situation, the Mahist army could not win against the Black Cloud Cavalry. Let's wait and see. Yili had removed most of the traps on the lake and under the cliff. She was amazed by the design of the traps. She did not dare to underestimate the wisdom of the ancient people. Originally, she had been considering if she should make some unconventional things to defend this mountain valley. Now it seemed that she did not need to waste the effort. If all the traps in the valley were activated and she did not know about it beforehand, even she did not have the confidence that she could escape unscathed. The simple buildings in the valley that had been equipped with arrows had been removed and replaced with a neat circle of wooden houses. In order to prevent sneak attacks from the snakes, rats, ants, and wild beasts in the forest, they had specially built walls around the perimeter and planted plants that repelled snakes and insects. All of this had taken almost 10 months of time and had just been completed a month ago. At the same time, she had spent all the silver that Han Mingyue had given her and her dowry. However, she had earned quite a bit from the trip to the Wind and Moon Pavilion. So when Yili saw everything in front of her, she felt satisfied and did not feel any heartache. 2 hours later, a black-clothed figure jumped down from the cliff and landed disheveled on the ground. Qin Feng looked. It was someone from the Shadow Guard. He snorted disdainfully inside. If Wang Fei had not removed the traps, that guy would have been shot through already. But he also understood that if Wang Fei had not warned him, he would not be much better off than that guy. This subordinate and 17 greets Gongzi. Yili nodded and indicated for him to rest on the side. A short while later, another figure appeared. It was still someone from the Shadow Guard. Then it was the Black Cloud Cavalry, and then it was the Mahist army. Qin Feng quickly found that it was different. The Shadow Guard and the Mahist army mostly moved alone and arrived alone. However, the soldiers of the Mo family army were traveling in groups. Therefore, every time they arrived, they would arrive in groups of 4 to 5. Although they weren't as agile as the Shadow Guard and the Mahist army, they were the ones with the most manpower. 4 hours later, Yili clapped her hands and gestured for everyone to get up. Greetings, young master. Yili nodded and glanced at the people in front of her. There were only 63 of them. There were 28 members of the Mahist army, 20 members of the Black Cloud Cavalry, and 15 members of the Shadow Guard. Break up the formation. I want to see that the people standing on your left and right are people that you don't know and are not from the same team. Although these people didn't understand Yili's intentions, they still obeyed her orders and quickly returned to their positions. Yili nodded in satisfaction. She had finally found some feeling. She pointed to the wooden house behind her and said, "From today onwards, you will live here for the next 3 months. Those who pass the final test can stay. The rest can return to their original places. If you're free, come and get to know the instructor who will be guiding you." Yili clapped her hands lightly. 8 men of different heights, young and old, walked in front of Yili and said in unison, "Young master." Qin Feng, who was standing beside Yili, couldn't help but raise the corner of his eyes. Although he couldn't tell where these people came from, without exception, they all exuded the aura of a powerhouse from the inside out. Without exception, they were all experts among experts. Yili nodded in satisfaction and said with a smile, "Everyone, other than the training that I have arranged for you every day, these people will also be providing you with special guidance. Of course, if any of you can be placed in any of them, then this test can be skipped. How about it? Do you want to give it a try?" These words definitely carried a hint of provocation. Soldiers, no matter which era they were from, were definitely the most hot-blooded type of people. Almost immediately, one of them flew towards one of the 8 who seemed to be the strongest, while the others also chose their own targets. With a series of kache sounds, the people who pounced on them all fell to the ground and couldn't get up. The youngest person clapped his hands and said to Yili with disdain, "Young master, aren't the people you chose too weak?" Yili smiled indifferently and said, "They aren't martial arts experts to begin with. I also don't need a group of top experts." The young man raised his eyebrows in confusion. "If you don't need martial arts experts, then what do you want us to do?" Yili asked with a smile. "Can you teach martial arts experts in 3 months?" The young man was speechless. No matter how conceited he was, he knew that learning martial arts wasn't something that could be accomplished in a day. Even he, who had been praised as a martial arts genius since he was young, had to study hard for more than 10 years to reach this level. Although I don't understand why the prince wants us to do, since the prince told us to listen to young master, then we will follow young master's orders. The older person said. Yili nodded with a smile and said, I didn't expect the prince to have so many hidden dragons and crouching tigers under him. He even has experts like you. But don't worry, it won't take up too much of your time. I only need you to give them some pointers in these 2 months. How about it? Is there anyone else who wants to try? The people in front had been defeated so miserably, so the people behind naturally retreated. Yili was very satisfied and said with a smile, then, let's go for a run first. Do you see the field outside the courtyard? For your safety, I even had people plant snake-repellent grass. It's broad daylight and there won't be any wild beasts with so many of you. Go around the courtyard and exercise. So you're saying that there will be wild beasts at night? Everyone looked at each other. Qin Feng looked at the people below and had to ask himself. Young master, how much should we run? Yili smiled sweetly, run until we're lying on the ground. Thus, a group of confused elites was pulled out for a run, although they didn't understand the meaning of this. But from a certain point of view they were all soldiers, so they still understood how to follow orders. So with 8 experts holding the line, dozens of people lined up to run in circles. Only Qin Feng was left behind, still confused as he looked at Yili, who was clearly in a good mood. Yili smiled and waved at him, saying, take a look. Get used to it for the next 7 days. I'll make adjustments later. Qin Feng looked down at the file in his hand. He could recognize the beautiful handwriting, but when he put it together he didn't understand what it meant at all. Every morning and evening there was archery, fighting, running, and so on. Even if he didn't understand, he could understand what it meant. But what were these parallel bars, push-ups, and so on? What did they mean and what did they do? In Qin Feng's view, apart from archery and fighting, the things written on this paper were basically useless. Yili said with a smile, it doesn't matter if you don't understand. It also doesn't matter if you don't know. When Dark 2 and Dark 3 are free, I'll have them teach you. I originally planned on having Dark 2 lead these people, but when I think about it, you are the Black Cloud Cavalry's commander, so you definitely have more experience than Dark 2. That's why, when you have time, remember to make up for it. Seeing the innocent and sincere smile of the handsome youth in front of him, Qin Feng didn't know why, but he shivered. His intuition told him that the next few months wouldn't be easy. The two of them jumped onto the roof, perfectly able to see the scene outside the courtyard. Yili clapped her hands and sat down on the roof. She looked at the people running outside who were out of breath and shook her head. These are the elites of your Black Cloud Cavalry? Don't tell me you've ridden too many horses that you can't even outrun the Shadow Guard?